Welcome to Law Scribe Media Radio. We are here today with Brent Schlueter. He is again a revisionist historian and a scholar on a variety of different subjects. We're going to talk about a lot of different things today. And he's coming on to the show again for the second time because we had some great feedback from the first episode. We wanted to get into those subjects in a little bit more detail. Welcome to the show, Brent. How you doing today?
Oh, welcome. Glad to be back. Big fan of yours.
How's everything going?
Oh, it's very good. I was a little worried, with less than a week, my theory upon the false flag in Chicago is coming up, and a little apprehensive about that, definitely. And it's like a bittersweet thing that the exploitation of the Cubs being in the World Series and having at least like 50 million people watching this is going to be exploited, and it could be the impetus behind the false flag. And who knows if like Wrigley Field could be attacked, and they would openly do it on national television. And I think that actually shows like the different dynamics about 9/11 and then how the different dynamics of today. Whereas I think with the popularity of the internet and social media, it is impossible to do something like 9/11, where today you would have to do it in a different manner, whereas it's actually better to do everything out in the open and scare as many people as possible, because people progressively, with the not explaining culture through PC and other things that are the enemy of explanation and create irrational thought, that becomes the new way of doing a false flag, is scare as many people as possible, get as many people on national television, and just it's all about fear. And that's why like 9/11 took people by surprise. There were a lot of people that went forward and talked about it, and especially things like the Mossad having agents within the United States. But I mean, it wasn't mainstream people that were saying this, and you had people talking about that something could happen. Now we talked about this before, about how in three major motion pictures you have Chicago being the victim of a false, or something similar to a false flag. And so, and much like before 9/11, we were teased by it. So something is going to happen. You have to look at Rahm Emanuel being brought into the picture, and how his brother, who is the architect of Obamacare, which allows for a civilian emergency task force that can execute martial law within the Chicago area in the event of a false flag, because it would be an emergency. So we could have the Emperor in perpetuity, Barack Obama, who is from the Chicago area, which adds to the drama, because now he has this dramatic feeling that I have to save my hometown, and it becomes like this little Hollywood story that gets propped up. And of course, that's what false flags are. It's Hollywood. It's live Hollywood, and everything is orchestrated, and nothing is real about it. Nothing was real about 9/11. It was an explosion. There's like 1,000-degree difference between what jet fuel explodes at and what steel beams melt at. Yeah. So even that basic scientific fact that can be nobody can shoot down, people still, you have a certain part of the population that will take that fact and will, there's something suspicious about that. And then the other part won't even listen to your explanation. So, but what happened to those people that took that part, then, it was Bush, it was Cheney, it was the CIA, it was everybody except who it actually was, the Mossad. So we're not even hitting the bullseye if we're not pointing to the Mossad. So all our scientific facts, any 8-year-old could figure out the scientific facts behind 9/11 and how one thing, it was one of the sloppiest done false flags you could ever imagine. Anybody can figure it out. And that's why so many people, a very high percentage of the population, if you talk to them, think something suspicious about 9/11.
They just don't know the details.
They don't know the details. They don't know who to tie it to. And they're more than willing, because of their hatred for Bush and Cheney, oh, well, it was the government. And then they make it a partisan thing. And the Democrats are so willing to hang Bush and Cheney over 9/11. And it becomes a partisan thing, and it really has nothing to do with that. And there was an open proof when you just Google 5 dancing Israelis. You can figure this all out. It's like even a little detail, like the same Stanley box cutter that was described on the one that was flying to the Pentagon was the same Stanley box cutter that was found in the van at 9/11 in New Jersey.
Of the Mossad agents, the 5 Mossad agents, urban moving systems.
Yeah, the urban moving systems van. So little details like that go together, those are what's relevant. But what is relevant to today, okay, even if you say that is 16 years in the past, look at ISIS, okay, and look at Al-Qaeda, look at Al-Nusra, look at any of it. Somewhere there are these Arabs that are coming into these groups and supporting the Jewish interests.
Right, they're being proxies of Israel and organized Jewry.
Right, they're proxies, proxy Mossad agents who are steering disgruntled people that are willing to buy into a mercenary salary, essentially. And that's, I love it when Putin came out and said, you know what, I know what they're making. It's like, it's out in the open. It's anybody that would try to explain ISIS, try to explain where are they coming from. Well, there's so many things, like where did they get their stuff? Who's funding them?
Even before that, the idea of that particular acronym, right? This was the acronym of the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Mm-hmm. This was known. Then in 2007 or 2008, way before we were officially given ISIS, there was a television show called Archer, cartoon, and they had ISIS. And again, it was a spy organization. So if you look at it from the perspective of predictive programming, of like you mentioned with 9/11, I think there's been I would say 3 or 4 dozen references to 9/11 in Hollywood films and even television shows. You had The Long Kiss Goodnight. You had, which was I think referencing the '93 bombing and suggesting there would be another one. You had Trading Places. Eddie Murphy was in that movie, and he gets out of the car right in front of the Twin Towers. And the very first scene you see, or the very first clip you see right after that, as you see the towers, is the minute hand, I believe, being on the 9, and the minute hand being on the 11, the hour hand being on the 9. So 9/11 was the clip that you saw right after that. The Medusa Touch from 1978, which was a film produced by Arnon Milchan, who was involved in stealing nuclear triggers for Israel. Basically, in his mind, and the Jews are very good at glorifying these types of individuals.
Executive producer of JFK. Yeah.
Yep, and he's basically their new Judah Maccabee. This lawless, vigilant lover of Israel and the Jews, who was basically a real life James Bond, according to them. And he not only stole the nuclear triggers, but this is a 1978 movie that's about a plane going into a tower. And it's remote controlled. What's interesting about that is it's mind controlled, according to them in the movie. The plot of the movie is that it's mind controlled into the building. But, Rabbi Dav Zachheim, who was, I think, the CEO of SPC. I think that was the name, Systems Planning Corporation. They had a flight termination, FTS, system that they developed in the late 70s. For remotely hijacking a flight that was already hijacked. Officially, that was the reason why they created it, so-called, is the ability to hijack a plane that was hijacked. So they had a couple false flags of hijackings of Arabs before this, and so that really had set up the narrative that Arabs are very vicious, and they may hijack Western planes specifically for some political end. So that narrative, because it was already established, because of the other, there was in the Rugrats movie, even there was a little clip where a plane gets disappeared behind the towers, and all of a sudden you see a flash, and supposedly the sun just appearing on the horizon, as opposed to a flash where the towers are being exploded. There's card games. I think there was an Illuminati card game that had pictures of that. So basically, they put it out there ahead of time. The reason why we mention Chicago now is because they've been doing that again. And it's been many movies, probably many that we don't recognize, because they do simple short clips in movies, and we're not that organized where everybody's scrutinizing these films for specific references to Chicago. But Source Code is one of the movies that Brent was talking about, where in 2011 there's a plot where some terrorists, nebulous terrorists again, are going to blow up the train, and the train heading into the city, ending in the now Willis Tower, former Sears Tower. In 2004, 911 days after 9/11, Silverstein led a group. Silverstein, who was the profiteer off of the World Trade Center, made 4.5 billion, I believe, off the towers as two separate terrorist attacks and insurance payout. He had put in $150 million in his investment to get the lease, the 99-year lease over the World Trade Center. Of course, it was condemned with asbestos. It would have taken about $2 billion to fix and restore. So, of course, it made a lot more sense to just destroy the building and destroy the evidence that was in the World Trade Center 7 of all types of secret dealings.
Enron.
Insider trading, Enron, a lot of different financial documents that would have exposed the criminal element that traverses our corporations and government. And it basically got rid of all of that evidence.
There was some that actually would have indicted Prescott Bush. I forget the details on that, but I know that I think it had to do with actually his trading with the enemy case, where he was fined for, with the Union Banking Corps in 1942 for dealing with Germany. So there was a lot of it was weird how that all was coincidental, that 9/11 just got rid of a lot of evidence.
Right, and what they do, they've done that a lot. So here's another reason why we think, again, that a false flag is coming soon. It may come, like you suggest, in October, here at the end of October and Halloween. We'll get into more details on that. But even if it doesn't happen then, it's definitely on the horizon, because there's a lot of the similar symptoms of pre-9/11. For example, the day before 9/11, 2.3 trillion was announced missing from the Pentagon's books. Ultimately, we did find out it was even more than that, close to 3 trillion, and a lot of it was newly minted F-16s and other military high-level military equipment that was basically given to Israel. They say at bargain basement prices, but probably just given. Now again, the Pentagon is announcing 6.5 trillion is missing. And if you look at Obama and the debt calculator, I mean, we've more than doubled the debt since then. And they're just now announcing that now 6.5 trillion. So even if you consider the factor of people who died, 3,000 something people died on 9/11, multiple coordinated attacks, instantly the narrative was spun and the war on terror began. Similarly, now we have similar issues, drills taking place, mass evacuation drills in Chicago, in the surrounding areas, even in St. Louis, Detroit. The roads have been blocked a lot, traveling from north of Chicago to Chicago. They've also had individuals, John Bolton in 2009 mentioned at a CPAC conference that there's a lot of benefits to nuking Chicago. And unfortunately, our mayor, Rahm Emanuel, who's a Mossad agent who served for Israel in the Gulf War, he is probably the highest level Sayanim, if you want to even call him that. I mean, I would call him a direct Mossad agent more than likely. Was the chief of staff at the White House, came back to Chicago to be the mayor, which is a humongous step down unless you have a false flag to cover up. And because of what he has said, what he has stated, one of the things that he stated many times is a good crisis should never go to waste, meaning that when something massive, some big issue happens, you need to take full advantage of it to railroad in all the communist Judaic kind of things that they do when these types of things happen. Rahm Emanuel's brother, as you mentioned, Ezekiel Emanuel, was involved with the Obamacare legislation, and in that there's a provision for martial law in the case of such an event, which, Obama obviously would tremendously benefit from in terms of his legacy, in terms of like, oh, I'm going to, help save the city, etc. And Emmanuel has other connections very, very deep into both administrations of the Clinton administration, the Obama administration. There's a lot of key connections. There's also individuals within Chicago, the Chicago Jewish apparatus, like the Crown family, the Pritzker family, the Saltzman. There's many, individuals who have inordinate influence within the city. It's one of the most segregated cities. And like he mentioned, there was 3 movies that we know thus far, at least, if not many more. The other one was Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus. I believe that was maybe 2010. In that movie, there's a specific clip where 5 individuals, men who are dressed as women, run underneath a woman's skirt. There's a huge explosion, and then after the huge explosion, her head pops off. And you can go online and look this up. There's one particular video. It's not very high quality, but Dr. Parnassus, who is Satan's deputy, comes out of her head and says, "We're going to Chicago, baby." And it's totally irrelevant in the scene. It doesn't really make sense. Now, the movie itself is a very Masonic film. It's kind of an Illuminati film. Heath Ledger was probably sacrificed ritualistically in that film, during that film, the shooting of that film. And they actually talk about that. They have 5 different individuals playing that one person's role, and they all allude to the idea of someone being sacrificed in the film. So it's a very, very dark, disturbing Masonic film. Luciferian film. There's another one more recently called Brick Mansions. I think it's a few years old, maybe 2 or 3 years old now. Paul Walker was in that, and maybe he was sacrificed during that movie because he definitely died during the process of that movie. Primarily taking place in Detroit, which is rundown city. But there's a particular scene around the 62-minute mark of the film where there's a nuke pointed at a skyline. And you're not sure which skyline it is if you're not, well versed in, architecture and things like that. But the movie is entirely placed in Detroit. But for some reason, this nuclear missile device is pointed directly at the skyline of Chicago. And a different point in the movie, there's a place where there's a nuclear hazard kind of icon that's placed on a map. And again, it's in Chicago as opposed to Detroit. So there's a variety of other things I'm sure we're missing. There's another TV episode called the Divergent series, and there's the first pilot episode of Insurgent. It's called Insurgent, I believe, and the real basis of it is a post-apocalyptic Chicago. So they actually, in the lead up to the show, the kind of intro, they actually traverse Chicago's skyline as if they're on like a drone or something like that, and they're filming it. And as they go through, it shows the skyline as it is today, and then it shows the skyline after it's destroyed. And it's like basically a kind of a hellhole in a sense. It's very dilapidated, it's completely destroyed. And they talk about this. And of course, there's no explanation given as to why Chicago. So when John Bolton mentioned it, Dick Cheney also mentioned it. So part of the reason why this whole Iran deal, where we look like we're kind of bending over backwards to a so-called, radical cleric state, radically theologically coherent state, like the Islamic Republic of Iran, it could be a diversion tactic, because what may happen is, they may say, well, because of the Iran deal and because you kind of allowed them to continue to enrich uranium, look what happened. Now we have a massive nuke exploding in Chicago, or multiple nukes, God forbid, in Chicago, and it was Iran. And it'll just give them the impetus and be the real catalyst to full-blown World War III, because instantly when you attack Iran, China and Russia are going to get involved. And, a battle between the United States and China and Russia would certainly destroy the United States. It would destroy large swaths of the rest of the world. And more than likely, Israel would be left, I'm guessing, based on what they expect and what their trajectory might be, untouched. And then, in some sense, the sole dominant power in the region, with all these statelets being created in Iraq and Syria. where they're trying to divide the people on sectarian lines using their proxy ISIS, which of course the United States is involved with, and Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Israel. Israel actually helps the coordination of everything. They're helping probably among the most in the intelligence factor, and also healing these ISIS soldiers when they get injured in Syria in battle. So I just wanted to give that little bit of a background, and specifically about Chicago. But there's other factors too. One of the things you had mentioned off air was the Cubs' bizarre turnaround. I mean, it's been 80 plus years, 90 plus years before
it's been 1908.
1908. So
yes. Teddy Roosevelt was president.
Well over 100 years since
Yes.
the Cubs have been in the World Series, and here they are. They're in the World Series. What do you think that's about?
Well, I think that basically they stole Theo Epstein, who is a Jew, and Brian Hoyer from the Red Sox. Really, the Red Sox gave up almost no opposition to that. Then you look at how they stole Joe Madden from the Tampa Bay Rays. And never mind the fact that Tampa Bay Rays have a Jewish owner. And now the president of the Rays at that time, or actually it was the general manager of the Tampa Rays, Andrew Friedman, is now the president of the Dodgers. Who knows if they tank that series or not? But you really have to be suspicious. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And they tanked 2 seasons, essentially, basically to get the 2nd overall pick and the 4th overall pick, and they took Chris Bryant, who had the 1st overall pick, was the Tampa Bay Rays, and passed on Chris Bryant. It's like another Olay. Here you go. And it's like cheating without cheating. I mean,
we talked about the similarity to where LeBron leaves Cleveland, and they get 3 out of 4 number 1 picks.
Yes.
In the years that he's away, and then obviously the table is set for him to come back and be the glorious leader, returning to his homeland to bring a title to the city.
Yes, and the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers is the CEO of Quicken Loans. I mean, the money lender of money lenders. So you have to look at the coordination of that, and the owner of the Miami Heat was an Israeli.
Oh yeah, not
Mickey
just
Arison.
any old Israeli too, a billionaire family.
Yeah,
Arisons.
Carnival Cruise Lines.
Yeah. Yachts and things.
Yeah, and it seems like the only people that are allowed are the Uber Jews are allowed to be the ones who win the NBA championship.
Yeah, and there's a lot of money in all of these victories because the merchandise and ticket sales and everything else that's associated with those teams. They create a lot of wealth for these people. And because they've already pooled their wealth, they're the ones who buy the teams, and to a large degree, they kind of gouge the players and everyone else. I mean, in terms of hiding certain revenues and things like that. But yeah, that's a really good point. Why Halloween? Why do you think specifically Halloween? What's some factors about a Chicago false flag that would make sense on Halloween specifically?
First of all, it'd be the easiest day for ISIS to hide out if they wanted to hide out, because look at your little ISIS costume. I mean, even if they get caught out there, I mean, they could walk right out in broad daylight dressed like they are, and everyone would think this is this cute little trend. Everybody's dressing like ISIS. Oh wow! I mean, what would scare people the most? That's what Halloween's about. It's about scaring people. So it's like, okay, yeah, I'll come out here with my curved sword. I mean, it'd be funny if they drove Toyotas and everything out there, and it'd be almost like a prank, but there wasn't a prank. And they could easily hop aboard a train, take that 7-mile trip from Willis Tower after blowing up the Willis Tower, and just go to Wrigley Field and start hurting everybody like they did in the concert in Paris.
Well, and with the killer clowns running around and this whole narrative being spun, that means that, those are just ISIS guys. Watch out for the clowns.
Yeah.
That actually would be the scarier thing to see, all right, because of what the public is currently, perceiving in terms of the clown. So it would be like scarier to see a clown than someone who is probably actually ISIS. Oh,
it probably lessens the effect of it. It's like, yeah, you're scared of everything. But that's what Halloween's about. It's about being scared. So people aren't watching out. And I also think that the 5th game of the World Series is scheduled on the 30th, which is Sunday. You'd have to get that delayed. Now, you have Chicago weather, and you have a Ricketts family who's very much anti-Trump, and those two had very much of a verbal spat. The Ricketts family created a $3 million anti-Trump super PAC, and are donated that to, and they would have no problem making something go wrong with the lights or anything if the whole story was about being against Trump. If the Mossad could come to them and sell them on a story where, oh yeah, this would really help Hillary's cause, then I think that they would go along with it. Because, I mean, if they're shady enough to do all the things they've done to turn the Cubs around, they're going to be shady enough to do this.
So do you think that they would want to do it on the day of a game as opposed to the day in between a game?
I think, yes. I think that they would want to attack because they're going back to that's game 5. So they're going back to Cleveland in game 6 and 7. So between that, I think what you have to do is scare the most amount of people to create irrational thought. That's what you have to do, because it can be exposed what's going to happen, but there's also a Monday night football game played that night, also between the Bears and the Vikings, and I think that could happen. I mean, for all we know, Cleveland or Chicago could sweep the series, and that would be irrelevant. So, but I think that is the plan, to try to, because that is where you are going to get the most amount of people watching. Could you imagine at a live event if ISIS did what they did at that Paris concert and did it with just like 50 million people watching it on national television? Mm-hmm. That would create the most irrational effect. What I found interesting about what you said was is the Iran narrative. I mean, are they going to go with the Iran narrative or the ISIS narrative? Or
combine them, because they do that. That's the problem. They don't have to make sense. They
absolutely. That is, yes. That is
the more convoluted, the better, because then you have everybody competing over the details, and that's the problem. And with 9/11, even, I mean, first one of the things they did was they diverted people all the time. So initially there was a nascent kind of movement, and then after that, people started coming in and were like, no, there was a nuke. It wasn't thermite. It wasn't nanothermite, even though nanothermite was the one thing that was like pretty much proven, right? I mean, as far as like evidence, physical evidence. But the problem is that they just went to like, oh, it was nukes or TV fakery, or hey, guess what? Here's a loose change. And this is going to be a movie created by 3 Jews that are associated with InfoWars that are being financed by Deborah Simon, who's related to the Simon family. She's like a wife, also a Hollywood producer, or connected to Hollywood as well, billionaire, tied to Frank Lowy, and she makes a film about 9/11 and 9/11 being done by the government. And then when they, like, for example, when they talked about the PNAC document, they mentioned all the goyim, all the Gentile, Shabbos goy, like Rumsfeld and Cheney and others. And they purposely would take you, kind of divert your attention away. They would circle the names that were goyim, and then the other ones you can see in the background are all Jews. And you're wondering, why did they do that? And then when they were confronted, of course, because people are vigilant, these 3 Jews who created Loose Change were confronted about this subject, and they got very angry, very defensive, and like, oh, we don't want to talk about the Jews, etc., etc. There's another guy named Luke Rudkowski still running around, a so-called friend of his named Dan Wallace, whose father died in 9/11, was exposing the Israeli angle. And this is early on. This is like 07, 08. I mean, there was a handful of people that were aware. I think myself and Jonathan, there was a couple other people that we knew in our circle that were aware of the fact that it was the Israelis. But as far as in the front of the 9/11 truth movement, that wasn't very common. Dan Wallace, whose father had died, was a very vocal individual, very aggressive, had converted a lot of people into thinking this way, knew that it was the Israelis, or that they were the tip of the spear. Somehow he mysteriously dies. They don't know what exactly the cause was. His heart just stopped, and he's in his mid-20s, early 20s. His girlfriend now is somehow taken over by Luke Rudkowski, and now they're an item. And Luke Rudkowski, who is a Jew, I think a Ukrainian Jew or Lithuanian Jew, he basically takes over a big section of the 9/11 truth movement under the guise of We Are Change, who, of course, historically and throughout have tried to assiduously avoid the Jewish angle and the Israeli angle to 9/11. And these kind of people got propped up, and then of course all the different theories flew around. Now I remember Trevor mentioned that I was involved with 9/11 missing links. I had written about half or a little bit more of the script. 9/11 missing links got a lot of people awoke. In fact, it was deleted off YouTube many times. I would say it probably has in the 5 to 10 million view range thus far. But again, it was kind of manipulated towards the end to make it seem like it was an anti-Jew film, and that's why I left in the middle of it. But at least the factor is that a lot of that information was finally spread. And of course, I would say the overwhelming credit in this regard, as far as 9/11 and the Israelis and the Jews goes, to Christopher Bolin, who was based out of Hoffman Estates in the mid-2000s. And in 2006, August, I believe, of 2006, the police came to his home unprovoked, and they they beat him in front of his family. They put his arm behind his back. They broke his elbow. They were, a 300-pound man resting on his temple, and they took him in, and it was totally unprovoked. They just showed up with an unmarked car. They turned off the video feed as they got on there, and then he was being prosecuted by a Jewish judge and a Jewish prosecutor, and he bailed on Chicago. He left, and he's now an international activist, kind of, doing his own thing, and he's been exposing this. But the majority of the early information, the early evidence of 9/11 being done by Israel, the credit has to go to Christopher Bolin. You can check out his website. I think it's bolin.com, BOLLYN.com. So yeah, again, that idea is important. The other thing is that do you know any of the details about Guccifer? Guccifer was the hacker who came out and said that there is a false flag nuke planned for Chicago. Now he mentioned 2015, but again, even now when we're saying that it's possibly Halloween, I mean, we could be wrong. They have different plans. They have contingency plans. So it could be a year from now. It could be after the election, but before the next president takes over, etc. So do you want to give them some details about the Guccifer hack and the...
I really have been trying for the past few months, trying to get the exact verbiage of his hacks, and I really can't find that. I can find synopsis of the hacks, and okay, it was supposed to be in 2015. He also talks about another city in Pennsylvania being attacked, but he doesn't give the specific name. Now, I honestly believe that could happen. Where I think you have to look when you look at false flags is two places that are directly owned by the Rockefellers and are the outpost of both the Frankfurt School, and I really think that they are Mossad outposts after post-World War II. The University of Chicago and the Columbia University. Those are they are nothing more than Jewish outposts. They are Mossad outposts. And you look at the history of the University of Chicago. The first nuclear reactor by Enrico Fermi was built there in 1942. From there, we have their nukes. That's how Israeli eventually led to having nukes themselves, was using the reactor and then building their nukes from there, and took years to expose. And JFK gave his life trying to prevent that happening, because he said, I'm going to withdraw funding to you guys if you don't allow inspections. So you have to see that, okay, that maybe they wanted to control the situation of the nuclear reactor to where only Jewish influence had nukes. And at that time, the Soviet Union was developing them, because the Soviet Union was somewhat Jewish controlled. I think Stalin tried to push them away from that by being a Russian nationalist. But at the same time, they felt that they could control the Soviet Union. And then now you see the turnaround with Russia. Now Russia has nukes, and that it's actually really backfired on them. But you have to look at, take a look at Lucy, and how that has affected the Darwin narrative. And you look at everything that fits the Jewish cause seems to come from either Columbia University or the University of Chicago. Saul Alinsky was taught at the University of Chicago. The New Age movements and what were the eventually became like hippie movements came from the Columbia University and John Dewey and Henry Marcuse and their philosophies. So they blend their philosophies, and then from there come the how we can create liberalism within the United States. And from there, what you can do is through New Age, you can shut down explanation of thought. And explanation of thought is how you get people to think rationally and stop being enslaved to their feelings and their emotions. And also Friedrich Hayek. You look at another wing where people who would be dissenters get a little distracted into are your libertarians, because they figure, okay, all you have to do is get rid of the government and you're a statist, and then they create all these labels, and then they, oh yeah, keep voting and continue your slavery, and they have all these jingoist phrases. But then because they are so extremist, they really don't have to explain anything, and then they don't explain anything, and from there you get dissenters who basically get mopped up and put in the mop bucket. And that's what you do. It's like a dissent sponge. And that's what the Paulbots did. And what have they accomplished? They're not doing anything. And now you look at the result of that, how so many people that bought into the Ron Paul message don't buy into the Donald Trump message. And then they're just not going to vote because, oh, yeah, both sides don't have our interest at heart. And they overgeneralize and say all politicians are bad. And you just need the government to leave you alone. The government's the enemy. Not the people controlling the government. It's the government itself.
Right. It's a nebulous entity at all times, so you can't really fight it.
Yes. And they don't understand the concept of nationalism, where you have a sovereign people united. And
on common principles. And, you know.
And because, we don't have that because we're not united. We don't have principles. We don't even have passion. We're a very apathetic nation. We're apathetic about everything. The only thing we care about is our emotions and political correctness, and we're stifled by that, and it becomes like a paralysis of dissent.
One of the other subjects, and we can't probably address it in full detail here, but one of the things I would say that coincides with this liberalist, I don't know, Fabian Society / Frankfurt School philosophy is that you have to manipulate the women of a population in a primary way, and by doing that, men who need women to procreate, and we need each other actually, are going to be forced to adopt those same paradigms to appeal to those women who have now been brainwashed by this narrative, because women are more emotional creatures. They feel more, they're instinctual, I guess you can say, when it comes to feelings and stuff. They have the nurturing capacity. So mass death and you know, evil stuff. Like, for example, I've talked to women about the child snuff you know, films, and where they basically rape a child on camera and then kill the child on camera. And apparently this gets really creepy weirdos off. They buy these films for sometimes $50,000 to $100,000 per film, and it somehow does something for them in terms of their weird, perverted, you know, sexuality. And this is something that women can't even have that conversation. I know that it's a very dark subject, it's macabre, but even men, I mean, we're supposed to be able to address this type of thing because, hey, I mean, if it's happening, we need to stop it, right? Women don't even want to know about stuff like this. So it's very easy to manipulate women with things like he grabbed her by the pussy or whatever, you know, and things like that have really nothing to do with reality. They're just words, or they're just things that, you know, kind of inflame your perception, but really intrinsically there's really nothing there. Like, for example, I mean, we're talking about Trump, and Joe Biden had the audacity to come out, and, you know, you posted a video about Joe Biden coming out very angrily and viciously against Trump about how Trump feels like he's above the law as it relates to being a pervert among women. But this is the same guy who not very long ago had a 13-year-old girl stand in front of him, and then he whispered in her ear that, do you have any idea how horny you're making me? And you're such a pretty little girl. And he tried to kiss her too. And it was just very ugly and creepy. And we don't even have any footage like that of Trump. So if you consider that this is the person who's flaming up the outrage and the grievance against Trump and these issues, or even on the Clinton side of things, where you have Bill Clinton, who's a very well-known rapist and womanizer, who can't at all by any means stop. One of the exposed emails from Colin Powell said that Clinton is still dicking down bimbos. So everyone knows this is not a secret. Yet until recently, the majority of the American population and global population didn't even realize that Clinton was that deep in this kind of perverted sexuality, and that's really the problem, is that they have so successfully brainwashed people. And the whole liberal concept and democratic concept is that they try to do good things, and sometimes the good things that they try to do, like social justice, etc., backfires, or they didn't do a great job, or they didn't think about certain contingencies that may occur, but their intent is good. And so that's why they actually get away with more evil during a liberal and democratic administration, just because the sugar coating on the top, the feel good phrases and the things that make you feel good emotionally, and and make you express outrage for anyone opposing those principles. And of course, they don't follow those principles. These are the same concept of the Freemasons that says liberty, equality, fraternity. It sounds so great. Why would you disagree with something like that? Or even Black Lives Matter, because of course Black Lives Matter. So why wouldn't you be a part of a group like that, even if they're terrorists, even if they're financed by George Soros? Now the Podesta emails. It's interesting. In March, Trump was supposed to come to Chicago and give a speech, and there was an outrage, massive outpouring. And it turned out from the Podesta emails, it was exposed that this was entirely organized by the Clinton administration using a Saul Alinsky tactic, which is basically have a lot of people get very loud and descend in one place and, be obnoxious, start fights, etc. They were encouraged to start fights. And it's interesting because we've studied this for so long. My instincts told me that. I didn't have any evidence whatsoever, but I asserted that it definitely seemed like a Jewish plot to organize all of this opposition. And it turned out it was. And in fact, they were brought in by the busful. And it was over 10,000 people that descended on the location where Trump was supposed to give his speech. All of these people, and they were Mexicans, homosexuals, black people, and Muslims, among others, that were all brought to bear, and they all started a big conflict, and they all declared victory because Trump decided not to give the speech to prevent bloodshed. These people were getting in fights with cops. They were destroying police vehicles, and Trump made a decision not to show up, and they considered this a success because they shut him down. That's the actual phrase they used, and it's shutting down his free speech that he had, an obligation and a right to give. And there was a lot of people that came there, including black people, including Muslims, who came out to the event to see what Trump had to say, but they were deprived that opportunity because of these provocateurs that were financed to go in there and create disruption. So this took place in San Jose. This was not the first time. And then of course what they do is they always blame Trump for the violence, because of a couple times where he was just talking about roughing people up who were roughing up other people around them. These were people who were being provocative and starting conflicts, physical altercations with people. There was this one older gentleman who punched a younger black guy that was walking past unprovoked, and of course I don't have to condemn that. Everyone knows that wouldn't be cool, but at the same time, that's that one incident, and then you have dozens of these incidents where, like for example, in San Jose, a woman was pelted, and the police stood down. The police were watching, and they didn't do anything. And in fact, there was a wink-nod agreement where the crowd knew the police weren't going to do anything, and that's why they were so provocative. In California, I think it was Costa Mesa, they were jumping on police vehicles. Now, you think about little black kids getting killed by police, and then you think about police vehicles being destroyed by people wide open. People have their video phones out and everything, and this was done. Nobody did anything to those people. So you have to wonder about all of these things whenever you're considering the concept of Trump and what Trump is suggesting and what he's saying and who's with him and who's against him. One of the things they've been pushing now more recently is that he's definitely got no shot of winning because of his, alleged video leak of whatever happened. And that just flies in the face of all of these email scandals that have erupted around Clinton, the over 100 people that she's murdered, political opponents and others, who are going to expose her criminality. I mean, this is a global crime syndicate of the Clintons, and it's very much attached to the Jewish apparatus, the global Jewish control mechanism, or what is I think Professor Petrus, he calls it Zionist power configuration, and they are attached at the hip with them, and that's why they're being brought in. I mean, one of the emails that was leaked that I found out recently was an email between Clinton and Lynn DeForester Rothschild, who was one of the heirs to the Rothschild dynasty. And Hillary says, "Oh, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, I apologize profusely for what happened. Tony feels bad. Tony Blair feels bad. He's I know, coming to see you guys, and I'm gonna come soon. What penance do I owe you?" Now, this is an individual who has nothing to do with the U.S. government, nothing to do, ostensibly, right? Nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with even corporate influence. And yet you have the president, possible future president of the United States, bowing down openly to take whatever punishment that this Rothschild heir has to give. I mean, that in and of itself should be enough. There shouldn't be anything else that's discussed regarding Trump versus Clinton. And this whole narrative, and you've mentioned this, that, oh, they're both bad, and it's, two evils, and Trump is, the greater of the two evils because he's just so crazy. This narrative is entirely ridiculous. And these same individuals who have been saying this for the last several decades in the United States in politics, where pretty much two controlled candidates go up against each other. Like, for example, Kerry and Bush, who, had the same lineage, from the secret societies at, I believe it was Yale. So this is the kind of thing that's been happening over and over and over again, and yet nobody talks about that. But then now, finally, when you actually have a nationalist, populist who's spending his own money, who became a billionaire on his own, who's being harassed and persecuted because he's a Christian billionaire who's standing on Christian principles. He gets audited by the IRS every year. He wants to stand up for religious values. He doesn't drink. His daughter, his sons, they're actually very articulate, very intelligent, very well behaved. I mean, they have rave reviews from everyone who knows them. He has rave reviews from everyone who knows him. There's plenty of black people who've talked about how wonderful he is as a boss, as someone they know. Plenty of Hispanics as well. He, I think, has Muslim accountants doing his accounting. I mean, this idea that this is some bizarre racist that's going to just destroy the planet in pursuit of some white hegemonic, narrative is just totally ridiculous. And it really doesn't bear out in fact. He says what he wants to say. He shoots off the cuff. And honestly, men who have their manhood intact, their masculinity intact, all have to bow their heads in respect of what he's doing, because a lot of them don't have that courage to get in front of the world and tell the truth. He is way more revolutionary than a guy like Ron Paul. The reason why is because a guy like Ron Paul refused to look at election fraud when it was brought to his attention, when he had the money to pursue it, when he would have had the moral obligation to pursue it on behalf of those who have picketed for him and spread awareness of his ideas. And he didn't talk about it. He didn't come on the Alex Jones show in 2008, specifically because he didn't want to be associated with 9/11 Truth. Yet Donald Trump, who's on the front page of everything, he's at the front of everything, brought that up. He brought that up, and he talked about how there's questions about 9/11, how he wants to go in and investigate it again. He's been reached out to by people who have written about 9/11 and made films about 9/11, and he's responded to those people in their campaigns. And of course, he did come on the Alex Jones show and talked about a lot of different things. So the stuff that he's bringing up, the NATO issue, the issue about our excessive kind of subsidizing of everyone's defense, including Saudi Arabia and others, well, we're not getting paid for it. And now, meanwhile, we're losing all of this money, and it's creating a situation where a big chunk of the American population are now feeling the pinch financially. And when you do that to a huge segment of the population, it's very easy to inflame them and say, oh, white Americans, the black Americans are your problem, or the Hispanics are your problem, or tell the Hispanics that the white people are the problem, and tell black people the white people are the problem, or the Muslims are the problem, or anyone, that is the issue, except the Jews, who have facilitated all of these conflicts. I mean, for example, in Britain, these people are bringing in the worst of Pakistani Muslims. A lot of those Pakistani Muslims that live in Britain, they say that we want to leave because this place is worse than the extremism back home. And, and these people are brought in, and then we are trained under the same Frankfurt School doctrine that we should, oppose the host society, and that they are racist for talking about things that are real. Crime, for example, Pakistani rape gangs in Britain, or things like that. So this is all facilitated by others. There's criminal elements within every society and every people, and they're now being brought to bear against white people in Europe, and specifically also here in the United States. And so it behooves those of us who believe in truth and justice to speak on these issues and really address them, and address them openly, not because you want to curry favor with white people or some other people, but because it's the truth. And if you're on board with the truth, then you have to follow it wherever it leads. I mean, how many people know about the Coudenhove-Kalergi plan for Europe that was started by the guy who was basically at the head of the UN in the very beginning, who was half Jewish, and he spoke specifically about he spoke specifically about how the racial context of Europe has to undergo a massive change. And then you have people like Sarkozy in France, who's also said that French people, white French people, I'm assuming, have to intermarry and interbreed with everyone else that's coming in. And so what they're trying to do is create a society that has no identity. You see, in the Quran, for example, I mean, both of us are Muslim. That doesn't mean that everyone else has to accept this, but it talks about how we're all different, but we're all come from the same source. And, there's certain characteristics that are different, but it's all because we need to know each other. We need to learn of each other. What they're trying to do is create a mongrelized the entire planet as a mongrelized society that doesn't have any heritage in spirituality, that doesn't have any racial understanding, that doesn't have any cultural heritage, and then you can just impose a nihilistic, materialistic, hedonistic kind of paradigm on everyone. So here in the United States, for example, as we've gotten further and further into depravity, an individual who's Hindu, who comes from a Hindu background, it's like, oh, well, we'll celebrate Diwali with you, but that's it. And then everybody else just kind of has this like, oh, work 9 to 5, and then, drink the last 3 days of the week, and, go back and do it again. And it's a cyclical thing. And it really doesn't, it's not it doesn't originate in anyone's culture, whether it's African or European or Middle Eastern. And this is just this artificial culture that's imposed on people. And so the differences in our identity, that our heritage, is just kind of simplified and tokenized. And so all of our distinct things that we could offer each other and learn from each other are being kind of fused and turned into a docile, kind of useless, ineffectual thing. And so as a result, we're much easier to control because we're not standing on any principles. There's nothing that we stand on anymore. So Obama spending billions of dollars on a transgender issue that affects only 0.001% of the population or whatever it is, we all just are embracing that and talking about how this is such a victory. And it's really not. It's really just a more depraved kind of look at everything, and it prevents communication about subjects that really matter. I mean, look at the gender divide. The men and women are not getting along, and as a result, they're not getting married, or if they get married, they have a divorce. And, there's kids being born in that situation. And of course, they're not going to be as well adjusted as those who have both parents at home. So the nuclear family has always been under attack. And it's easier to do this in Europe because they've kind of lost their belief in Christianity. I feel like that's one of the biggest things that they've done is they've successfully established an atheistic paradigm, and with the full-throated endorsement of science or pseudoscience, where it says that basically science is revealing that there is no God in essence, and that especially the Christian God of 6 days and 6 nights and that kind of creation narrative simply can't abide with these new scientific paradigms. So it's eroded that faith that people have, and faith to me is one of the key things that prevents people from flagrant impropriety and iniquity. And that's one of the things that they've successfully, I think, established in all of these places. So tell us more about, like, as far as the Frankfurt School paradigm, the idea of the PC culture and the inability to communicate things because your words are going to be manipulated and you're going to look like a bigot just for telling the truth.
Well, if you don't have the ability to explain, then there is nothing you can do, because what we have on our side is the truth. That's our weapon. And if we can't present our weapon, then they can come at us with their lies, which is their weapon, and truth and lies, and the truth will always overcome the lie. So what they have to do is lie using secrecy. And that's why they have to bring in their Luciferian Trojan horse. They have to find ways, because they are, like the Jews themselves, they could be anywhere from between 16 to 40 million people living among 7 billion Gentiles. How can the Jews take over the world if they don't have these little Trojan horse? Everything that they do has to have a Trojan horse, because they're small and the world is many, and for them to have the buffer and create a way that I can get the Gentiles to fight amongst themselves and kill off each other. So they find the ones that have the most similarities to them. Like Germans have been so easy to manipulate because they have a lot of the same characteristics. And I know this is going to make a lot of people mad, but the Germans have a lot of things in their culture that are very similar to the Jews. They have a very supremacist attitude. And you look at like the Hindus, the Hindu culture. I mean, it's almost exactly like Judaism, where they believe a certain part of the world is theirs. It's their holy land, and everyone else on it is trespassing, just like the Jews believe. So this is like the twins coming together. It's no coincidence that Israel and India are going to get along so well. It's because you look at it's a Hindu run government right now. So you have these two
Hindutva,
yeah,
extremist Hindus.
I don't want to lump them all in, but I mean Hindu not. So it's so easy to buy, and you look at like a lot of the reason why so many house Arabs come into working with the Jews is because they have a lot of the same characteristics as the Jews.
Shout out Linda Sarsour, working with Soros and Blumenthal.
Yeah, and one of the things that's I think has totally corrupted Islam as a whole is I think that there are a certain population of Arabs who want to own the Ummah. And they think that they are superior Muslims because they know Arabic and they have like a supremacy amongst themselves. Mm-hmm. And this is why they are so easily bought into the Jewish narrative, because they themselves believe themselves to be a chosen people within a religion themselves.
That's right.
So these two working together, and the Jews seek out people that, and you look at the similarities in the religions of Protestantism and Judaism. So you look at the two most dangerous cultures in the past 500 years, Great Britain and the United States. Well, look at Protestantism and its belief in social Darwinism, and look at Manifest Destiny versus Zionism. It's the same concept. So you have these. What they do is they seek out the ones that have the similar characteristics in them, and like, you know what, we're one. You know, we need to get together, and it's these people over here that are holding us back. And we know that they're going to try to take over the world. Deuteronomy 20 is a declaration of war for the Jews on the Gentiles. Read it. For in the cities where the Lord gives you an inheritance, save nothing alive that breathes. That can mean nothing else. That in cities that they are given in the inheritance, that's in Genesis 15:18. Open it up, read your Bible, and you look. More than half of the people probably have a Bible somewhere in the drawer of their house. Mm-hmm. Open it up and read it. Read that Old Testament, because if you do, you will see that the Jews have declared war on you. This is a 3,500 to 2,500 year declaration of war that they have slowly worked their way to.
Absolutely.
And this false flag and the reason they couldn't have done it before is they are a small population and we are many. But they are using us to fight amongst ourselves. And when we destroy ourselves through nuclear war, a Russian war with NATO, things like that, Agenda 21, Pakistan and India get in a war, that could kill off billions of people. And before long, they're going to be the dominant power in the world because they've killed off about 6 billion of us.
Yeah.
So now they don't have to worry about these 7 billion Gentiles, because now the 16 to 40 million people that are the Jews, they now are going to be a majority.
Go ahead.
And one of the things is, even if there are 1 billion Gentiles left, the Jews are more organized. They're more together.
Oh, yeah.
They have they certainly have better constructs. They know exactly where to put their power into. They don't waste time with other certain things. And one of the things is when they write a book, it's like a gangbang of 20 people writing a book, whereas we try to do everything by ourselves. We're lone wolves.
Yep.
I mean, we're working here together today, but most of the time we're working by ourselves and doing our own little thing. Meanwhile, the Jews are every little project they have, they put 20 to 100 people on.
Yeah.
They have a better organization than we do.
Well, yeah, they don't even create one organization. What we do is we create an organization, and then we start fighting within that organization. We can't create larger organizations. We get subdivided so easily, even without Jewish provocation. You know what I mean? We disagree on stupid things that have nothing to do with anything. And as a result, we don't accomplish much. I mean, if you look at the 9/11 truth movement as a microcosm of this concept, I mean, we are here now well over 15 years after the fact, and a big chunk of the population may know that something nefarious took place and that it wasn't as we were told. I would say the majority maybe of the population, but they don't have an alternative explanation, as you mentioned, and so they don't know what exactly did take place. So it's like, well, yeah, there's some questions, but it's not really like, hey, this is actually what took place. And the problem with that, again, is that because the Jews do false flags and then they have so much control over global media, they instantly unravel their narrative. They weave it right away, and as a result, people just kind of develop that because there's a vacuum there. So you have to come up with something to place there as to what happened and where you're going to get information. I mean, let's say, God forbid, this false flag occurs. Where are people going to go for information? On a false flag, it's going to be on the television. It's not going to be on the internet. And with a lot of this weird stuff has been happening since Obama gave the control of ICANN to whatever international body, and we've noticed blackouts. We've noticed issues with different feeds on different YouTube channels. There was I think a massive hack of Google, Facebook, and Twitter supposedly. There was also a blackout that resulted from very limited access on like the entire east coast of the United States when one of these big companies, IP companies, was taken out for several hours. And so when you think about stuff like this, it almost seems preparatory. It almost seems like they have some other agenda and they're trying to execute it. And of course, with all the lies about Russia hacking us and all of this stuff, which is really a diversionary tactic, you can create the narrative that they're the ones doing these things, and really they may just be doing it themselves, testing it out to see what they can accomplish in that time frame. I mean, several years ago, Israel cut the cords to internet in Iran. And this kind of cyber warfare takes place on many different levels, and we don't know all the international bodies involved. And that's the reason why you don't, as Obama, give the ICANN to international body that can't be controlled and can't be brought to justice, and you can't even figure out who did what. And of course, this is very strategically effective for the Jewish power structure because they thrive on the lack of information, because then they fill the voids. So there's so many different websites now talking about these things. If there was to be a false flag in Chicago, and until Rahm Emanuel leaves, it doesn't matter if we get it right on October. We don't want to get it right, but if it doesn't happen October, it doesn't happen November. It's going to happen at some point, unless either God prevents it or we prevent it. As long as Emanuel is the mayor of Chicago, you cannot think that it won't happen, or think that we're past it until he's there. And even let's say he leaves and it didn't happen, but you got to see who's coming in after him. But there's a reason why he's there, and it's interesting. I just picked up a book by Rahm Emanuel done with someone else. I think it's called The Plan, and it's very interesting that the entire doctrine of the book and what it proposes is a different world, because in the new America, we're in a different world where there needs to be universal X, universal Y, universal Z, which is really the ultimate strategic Judaic plan, is to have a communist dictatorship. So the one world government would be communist in I guess feel, and in the way it represent it is how it's going to be exercised, and it's totalitarian. And again, it says that it requires universal citizen volunteering. for whatever the government decides that they should be volunteering for, because they're going to have universal health care. And we saw that Obamacare was kind of a stepping stone to universal health care, and we've seen the destructive effects of something like that. They want to do that specifically so they have one mechanism to control everything. Even all of these different varying currencies, it creates too much chaos for them to control everything at every step of the way. So what they ultimately want to do is to have one currency throughout the globe. They're going to have intermediary steps. Like for many years, we've been hearing about in America that they're going to turn Mexico, America, and United States and Canada into one giant kind of regional organization or regional group. And then they would have their own symbol of money, which we're moving from the dollar to something called the Amero, I believe it was. Now, it hasn't happened yet. It may not happen just yet, but these are their strategic plans. I mean, they've already accomplished this in Europe, and they've actually convinced the population that it's good for them because there's a borderless society and that they can kind of travel very easily between different countries, and it makes sense to them. And here in the United States, one of the things that we could do to prevent this, and one of the things that Trump has continuously talked about, is giving the states the rights. So, for example, if when you talk about whether it's abortion or medical marijuana or whatever these issues are, different states, or even like a minimum wage, all of these things can be addressed at the state level. And in fact, that's what the Constitution intended, right? Because we were supposed to be able to have that kind of autonomy. And honestly, if you have 50 states, they're all trying different things. For example, education, right? Education, it's basically another slush fund as another arm of the Jews, because it's a giant apparatus. There's really no oversight, and we don't even know what they're doing. They've been pushing Common Core, which is basically a de-evolution of education, a de-evolution of learning. And again, Trump is against that. But when it comes to all the money that we could save by dismantling these giant governmental bureaucracies, federal government bureaucracies, you have more money to give the states to become incubators of innovation, where you can try one thing in one state and try another thing in another state, and whatever works best will be adopted because it'll be like the best practice. So all of the issues that face our country could be addressed in this is one way to address all of those issues in a variety of different ways. It kind of, whatever the results are, you kind of distinguish and quantify the positive effects of different approaches. So all of these things, they want the opposite. They always want universal. They want to be able to control everything secretly, and they're going to put a Gentile at the head. They don't want to be at the head of these types of things. They don't need to be at the head of these types of things. What they need is someone who rapes children to be at the head of it, because then you say, hey, we're going to provide you with children to rape, and you got no problem, we'll bring them to you. Or the opposite end of it, the stick side of it, against the carrot, is that we can expose you to the world using our global media control and show that you're actually a pedophile rapist, if you get out of line. So do you want money and fame and power, or do you want to be disposed of because somehow your conscience, irritated you for a second whenever we asked you to do X, Y, and Z, like, for example, blow someplace up with a nuke? Right. And Obama, and even before Obama, others have been exposed when it comes to a nuclear bomb being exploded some other place. I think in 2007 there was a scenario. In 2009 there was a scenario. In 2014 there was a scenario where nukes are being shifted around, and there's people involved that are feeling the fear and the hate, of what's happening, and they step up to the plate and become whistleblowers, and they, kind of foil the plot, as it were. And then, a lot of them have ended up dead soon thereafter. Even the whole bin Laden situation in 2011, I believe it was, or maybe 10, where they said that they killed bin Laden on May Day, which was like a witch day because they're, weird and they got their own symbology and numerology. And, on that day that they supposedly killed Obama, there was like a Navy SEAL Team 6 or something that supposedly did it. And then those people were all transported on different helicopters. Actually, one helicopter, I believe. You can get the details online, but and it was all blown up, and a bunch of these people died. And you're like, wait, what? Like they were heroes, and now they just get smoked in Afghanistan. So it's like, it doesn't, all of this stuff, that there's got to be people in these situations that step up to the plate and maybe sacrifice themselves for the greater benefit of humanity, because these people will not stop. What they do is they regroup. They've been kicked out of Britain how many times? over, the last several hundred years.
From 1290 to 1649, yes.
Yeah, over and over and over.
The
again.
beheading of Charles I, and then Cromwell took over for 8 years and got them all back in.
That's right. And Hugh of Lincoln was a child who was ritually sacrificed by the Jews, Christian child, and as a result of that, they were expelled once again because some pockets of them still do this. And up north in Chicago, actually, in Skokie, Illinois, is where a big pocket of Chabad Lubavitchers live. Chabad is a very extremist Zionist Jewish orthodoxy that basically wants to impose Noahide laws in the United States, and is probably involved in a lot of pedophilic child rape, and within this community in the 1980s or maybe 90s, there was a lady named, I believe her real name was Rachel. I forgot the name. She called herself Vicky Poland. She came on the Oprah show, and she talked about how in her family, specifically in other families that she knew of, Jewish families, they came from a long line of people who used to ritually sacrifice children and drink their blood. And Oprah was the Jewish organizations, the ADL leading them all, as they usually do, demanded that Oprah apologize for this, and she never did. And in fact, as she was retiring, I think a few years ago, there was a Jewish individual, I forgot her name, very supposedly right-wing Jew, who said, Oprah still never apologized for talking about Jewish ritual sacrifice. And this is a very important subject that nobody really wants to address. People don't want to address this. Now, I'm not saying all Jews do this, but why do they do this? And how do they do this? And what happens to the tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of missing children just in the United States every year?
Well, that gave the alibi for Titus to destroy the temple. That was one of the things, was the child sacrifices were going on there. Mm-hmm. That was also when Edward I in 1290, that's what got them expelled, along with coin clipping. Those were the two major offenses that got the Jews expelled, and they were, for many centuries, expelled from Great Britain, even though Anne Boleyn was a crypto Jew and basically was the love of the life for about 9 years for Henry VIII. Helped turn him around, and all the corruption of England came from his love affair with his Jewish whore. But essentially, they were not in, but they were slowly, progressively in, because Anne Boleyn, her daughter, was the most famous queen of all time, Elizabeth I, and the longest reigning queen in England's history. And so it kind of softened up, because Protestantism was essentially Messianic Jew with different holidays. It softened it up because it essentially was a housing unit for Jews. You have to understand that in the Iberian Peninsula, Jews were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula. Now, they were Ferdinand and Isabella were indebted to certain Jews. So the way they compromised that out was the Christopher Columbus situation, and Columbus was a Jew, and August 1st, 1492, that was the day that the Jews were expelled from the Iberian Peninsula, and August 3rd, 2 days later, that's when Columbus set sail for the Americas. And what that did was that created a way to export Jews, and they were hiding under the Catholic title of Marrano, where they converted
crypto Jews.
They were crypto
Jewish,
Jews,
but they presented themselves as Christians for the sake of not being persecuted.
Absolutely. And then this was how Europe was taken over, because they found this crypto Jew mechanism.
Well, and this is a very ancient Jew mechanism, and this didn't apply to the Muslims who were expelled either, because they didn't do this for the most part.
Right. Yes, a lot of people tie things to the Moors, like slavery. They talk about slavery on the, and the Moors had nothing to do with the slavery. What the Moors did was they allowed the Jews to be themselves whenever they took over, and it always comes back to backfire in Islamic territories when the Jews live happily in Muslim territories, like they did in the Ottoman Empire. Because the Muslims allow Jews to be themselves. They don't allow their usury and things like that, but they allow okay, you believe in slavery, fine. You have your own slaves. We're not going to do anything with that. And that was a downfall of them, because history now talks about, and the white supremacists love this narrative, that the Moors had white slaves. And the Moors had nothing to do with it. The Jews within the Spain, or what was before Spain, they were the slave owners. They had the slaves. The Moors had nothing to do with it. Yes, the Moors had control of that area, but the Moors were allowing the Jews to do their thing. But the white supremacists love that story. Mm-hmm. And that always seems to come back to haunt them, is when the Jews seem to go live in Muslim lands, and then their tolerance takes over, and then what happens is when Jews get expelled, they go to other places, and like Holland, in the Netherlands, and after the Jews were expelled, they went there, and it was overrun by crypto Jews. Mm-hmm. And in that time, that's where like our modern insurance concept comes from, was from Holland, right after the Jews were kicked out and they went there. The stock market was actually created in Holland. Most of our financial institutions were actually created in Holland at that time. And they were done by this crypto Jew Trojan horse. It's like I said, they always need a Trojan horse, whether it be the Marranos, whether it be the Trojan wasp, whether it be, because they can't take over the world without this. So, and like you talked about Central Europe, what actually changed the dynamics of Central Europe after World War II, and most people don't talk about it, basically after the winter of 1643, the war was pretty much over. They could have surrendered right there. But when you look at what happened the last year and a half in Europe during that war, it was Catholic community after Catholic community after Catholic community that was destroyed. Dresden, in March of, I think, 1944, was destroyed strategically on an Ash Wednesday, too, which was kind of a joke by Winston Churchill. It was a Catholic community, and Winston Churchill would use carpet bombing and would destroy it. And I think it took over a course of 4 days, killed 600,000 Germans.
Yeah, it's very interesting that they would do that, because they hate Christianity a tremendous amount. Mm-hmm. And I think the Catholic model is very dangerous for them, because there's one person at the helm and over, almost 1.5 billion people. Yes,
and the thing about that is you look at what would happen 20 years later with Vatican II and how that would Judeify to the max Catholicism.
And also, don't the Rothschilds have control over the vast wealth of the
yes,
Catholics?
To an extent.
Meaning that's in their banks.
Right. There's the Vatican Bank, there's P2, there's the corruption of the Holy See. I don't believe Jesuit stories. To me, when people start talking about Jesuits, I tune them out, because they don't really know what they're talking about. No, they don't. The Jesuits were actually created to fend off the destruction to the Catholic religion after the Protestant Reformation. Mm-hmm. And that was the whole point of the Jesuits.
And also those people who bring up, I think his name is Eric John Phelps. He was an Israeli diamond dealer that brought up this whole thing about, he wrote a book about the Black Pope, I think. It's just total lunacy. You'll notice that disinformation agents will bring up the Jesuits all the time. One of them I remember is Leo Zagami. I don't know if you've come across that name, but in the late 2000s, he was very prominent. Benjamin Fulford is another one. Talks about how there's a Chinese ninja society that's like gonna fight the Illuminati for us, or some ridiculous notion. And but again, the Jesuits feature very prominently in the conspiratorial element.
Well, there were two other cultures who bring about to another point, was that two other cultures were killed off also in World War II. Of course, there was no reason for the D-Day invasion. You had the war almost over.
Right.
The reason was to destroy Catholic France, and that was the point. Catholic. And it's just like my point last time when I talked about the religious element in slavery. People need to, when they look at history through revision, they downplay all the religious element when it has everything to do with everything. And the reason France had to be destroyed on the 6th day of the 6th month in the 6th hour had to be destroyed was because it was the mainstay of Catholicism in central France or Central Europe. That's why France had to be destroyed. They had to destroy the Catholic elements within Germany. By the way, Hitler was Catholic. Joseph Goebbels was Catholic. Most of the best parts of German of the German National Socialist movement were Catholic. And I think it really says a lot to the Catholic movement, whereas I mean, Bismarck was a good man. He was Protestant, but basically, like Kaiser Wilhelm, that was like a Protestant entity. So you have, when you study European history, you must study the difference between Protestantism and Catholicism and the war between those two. And it has everything to do with Irish and English and the French and the British. And you understand. And how now France is this Judaified, colonistic, imperialistic country because it took out that Catholic element. And that's what the French Revolution did. It killed off the Catholic element. I mean, it kind of restored, but then it never got it back. So the other thing that a lot of people don't understand or know about is that the two prominent Catholic cultures in Japan were Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those were the two Catholic cities of Japan.
I didn't know that.
Systematically, I mean, why not just bomb Tokyo? So why are you bombing the two Catholic communities? You can tell the religions that the Jews fear by the ones who suffer the most.
That's a good point. You know, it's interesting when Americans and Europeans have been talking about ISIS, and they're talking about it from their perspective that, well, they're after us. They're coming after us. But honestly, ISIS is destroying Muslim communities at a much more alarming rate. And we're not even talking about, ISIS is Sunni, so they're going to only attack Shias and like Alawis, Ahmadis, whatever. No, they kill Sunnis, lots of Sunni, just because they're not Sunni enough, I guess, or whatever the word, would be. And Ramadan is obviously very, very sacred. And a lot of these attacks that are happening by so-called Muslim extremists happen during Ramadan, and they kill primarily Muslims. So you have to wonder if it's really an Islamic organization, maybe in let's say the white supremacist viewpoint, that it's actually genuine Islam, just, unapologetic, unabashed barbarianism. Why would they do that? They could find better targets. So it just doesn't make sense unless you look at it from the perspective of the Jew, who wants to exterminate all religions except Judaism. And Judaism, really, if you want to look at it exactly what it is, it's like satanic Luciferian self-worship. It's not really like, oh, there's God and we're going to worship God. Even if there is a concept of God collectively among most of the Jews of the world, the Jews are the collective God themselves. There's stories with the Talmud where rabbis beat God in an argument, and things like that. So the rabbi is actually elevated above God. And then if you look at the tree of life and the Kabbalah and how the numerology works, I mean, they basically try to supplant God. It's almost like, okay, God, we're your chosen people, but guess what? By being your chosen people, we chose to get rid of you. And if you look at the protocols of the Elders of Zion, that's one of the things that they talk about a lot, is that they have to exterminate the concept of God, and especially a God that is for everyone. So that God that you and I could, unite upon as brothers, despite coming from entirely different backgrounds, just because on the basis of our common humanity. And, for example, with Islam, it literally teaches that throughout its scripture, is that we're all from the same source. We might be different, we might be culturally different, but it really doesn't matter what color or where we come from, men, women, and whatever. It's really about righteousness. And that's righteousness in God's eyes, not in the idea of some religious authority, dictating who is righteous and who is not. So attacks on religion on the from the scientific and intellectual and rational perspective, and attacks on religion directly, like that. Like, I mean, for example, why were the Armenians, right? I mean, they were Christian.
Yes, Orthodox Christianity. Not Protestants. When have Protestants ever been attacked? Tell me that. If you just think about that for a
Even
second.
the Ukraine, the Holodomor, where 15, 20 million people died, they were Orthodox.
Absolutely. And there were some Catholics too, but yes, absolutely. So, I mean, outside of a few Huguenots in France, I mean, I really can't think of a time Protestants have ever suffered, except for now in the United States, when probably what's coming to us, but now we're pretty much secular. So, you can tell by who suffers the most, who the Jews fear religiously.
Mm-hmm. Shias now in the region.
Yes.
And the reason I believe that they fear Shias the most is because regardless of what disagreements you and I and anyone else, any other Muslim specifically, would have with the theology of Shia Islam, we have to recognize and we have to applaud them and for what they have done in terms of their actual proof, the tangible proof of their belief. Because really, to me, people can believe whatever they want. But if you really believe what you say you believe, then you're going to act on it. And the entire resistance axis is almost entirely Shia. If you look at Yemen, if you look at Iran, if you look at Hezbollah in Lebanon. And then they've inflamed the Sunnis to basically tacitly endorse ISIS. Because here you have ISIS running amok and killing Sunnis. But here we have only the Shia, even in Iraq, Shia militias have stepped up. And I'm talking about 15-year-old kids getting trained on assault weapons really fast and going out to battle against America and Qatar and Israel and Saudi Arabia's proxy forces, these terrorists that have been unleashed in the region. It's Shias fighting them in every single instance, and they're doing so in a nation in the name of nationality or national sovereignty. They're not doing it just specifically like, oh, this is because we're Shia, but you have to respect the fact that they are Shia and they're following this kind of pattern of resistance. And in the historical narrative, they've also given a lot of sacrifices. So theologically, if there's a disagreement on one or another issue, I have significantly more respect for the majority of the Shias of the world as opposed to the Sunnis or even sometimes Ahmadis. I mean, I'm an Ahmadi Muslim, but I mean, do they really even speak out? Because here people are sacrificing their lives, for preventing this Jewish hegemony across the region, which ultimately will, manifest around the world. So, if you don't let them get Syria, if you don't let them get Yemen, all of their strategic plans that they want, are going to build off of destroying these two nations can't take place. You see? So like Syria, they thought that would be really easy, just like it was in Libya or just like it was in Iraq. But it wasn't, because the population was already a pluralistic society. They were already getting along. And we're not talking about just Muslims. We're talking about Christians and others. So as a result, the general population was totally against this outside invasion. Yeah, there were some things they would wanted, democratic measures and, ease of certain, rules, etc. and laws. But for the most part, they've all united against this foreign-backed mercenary force coming in and dividing Syria for their own purpose. And of course, the United States and NATO and Turkey now is all saying that we are just basically, these are safe zones that we're creating for a humanitarian purpose. But this humanitarian lie has been going on a very long time. But specifically, when I think about that and the religious element, right now the Shias are the ones facing the brunt of Jewish persecution because they're the ones standing up to them in the most prolific and the most unified and the most dignified and the most staunch manner, and they're relentless with it. So when you think about what Hezbollah has done, it's not so simple as just saying, oh, well, they've defended Lebanese sovereignty. They've done far more than that. They've proven that this so-called Israeli military juggernaut is a monumental farce. It's a paper tiger.
Absolutely.
They blew away their ships. There was a guy named Ali Bilal Saleh, God rest his soul, who took out, I think, anywhere from 8 to 12, maybe 14 Merkava tanks on his own. So because of the tunnels they've built up, he would pop up out of one place, shoot a missile right through one of the Israeli tanks, and then go pop up somewhere else and do it.
There's no substitution for infantry. And if you have a pussified infantry, trained and dedicated, you have a spirited, dedicated, will do anything it takes to win, and are fearless, and are not self-centered, and when the bombing comes, I mean, Israelis, they're going to run away, and it's like
they're the biggest cowards.
They're the biggest cowards, and because they know that their whole identity, religion, country, everything is built on lies.
Yeah.
So you're fighting for lies, and when war, it makes everything real. When war comes, everything becomes real. And that is the time that the truth overcomes. The only thing that Israel has is nukes. And close in range, I mean, if you're going to nuke Hezbollah, you nuke Lebanon, Israel's going to destroy themselves.
Yep.
That's just common sense.
There's no other way.
So, yeah, fine. If they're the Samson option, they have the Masada complex, fine. They're religious zealots. They're willing to destroy Israel to fight for this Jewish cause. Go right ahead, you know. I mean, save everything alive that breathes. That didn't mean the Jews too, but maybe some took it that way. And you also, you'd look at it. I mean, there's 3 entities that you have to applaud that have, from day one, been going right at the Jews. Focus on the Jews, like they should be. That's Putin's Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah.
Absolutely.
And beyond that, you can't really say, I mean, yeah, Syria and all
and
them.
The Houthis in Yemen, and you have to give them a shout out because, my goodness,
yes.
I mean, you know, one of the biggest proxy forces of the Israelis is Saudi Arabia. It's basically the Muslim face. It's the Muslim mask of Israel. And they come from a long line of crypto Jews that were installed by British Freemasonry, and they are basically creating a conflict. They invaded, and they took a stance of destroying the indigenous resistance of Yemen. And now you have these Houthis destroying the Saudis, not just the Saudis, but the Qataris and anyone else, the UAE, everyone who sent people in there. I mean, they blew away their princes, they blew away everybody. And the reason why is because the weaponry was facilitated through Syria and Iran. And some of this stuff is Russian, you know, in origin. And some of it's indigenous. Some of it is just them building their own
And that's
stuff.
very smart. And I'll tell you why. It's because if you get Iran sending soldiers and everything to that, and you create an Iranian-Saudi war, you're going to create all the Sunni are going to gang up on Iran. They're going to gang up on the Houthi. And there's a lot of people that actually hate Saudi Arabia. But if you bring Iran into the picture, and a lot of the Sunni are going to turn on and support Saudi Arabia just because it's against Iran. That's how convoluted everything is in the Arab world. And so to avoid that, it's very smart that Putin and Syria are sending those in, because then it takes out that sectarian warfare that's going to divide, because that is what's going to destroy. If you want to, they want to have a clash of civilizations between Muslims and Christians, but what they can do now is have a sectarian war and just have everybody just destroying each other. That's what the Jews want in the first place. And that's what you're creating so by allowing the Houthi to essentially be on their own and just supplying them with one thing that's always very smart. Let the ground soldiers be from that country, because they're standing up for their own country. If all you need is an air force, or all you need is weaponry, I can supply that.
And training.
Putin is very smart. Yes, you need to train, because if you have like advanced jet fighters like they gave Iran, you're going to need people to fly them that know what they're doing. But it's like, I don't have to expend my own men. I don't have to be drawn in like I'm the one starting all of this. And okay, all you need is an air force. Fine, I can send you an air force. Like, I can use my planes to take out al-Nusra, and you can do your thing. And that's what Putin does. He's like, what do you need as an equalizer? It's not, I'm going to send stuff in. No. What do you need as an equalizer? And I can give you the equalizer. And don't extend, and because of that, he doesn't extend himself to where he can't win a war in Europe.
Yeah.
Or if he needs to have a war in Europe, he's not overextending himself. It's very, very chess matchy.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that they have to do that. I mean, it's unfortunate that really it's just about the Jews that want to destroy the whole planet. I mean, all these other people, they don't want to fight. They don't really want these conflicts. I can just imagine if you took out the Rothschild banking dynasty apparatus and from the world, just took it out of the world scene. Yeah, there would be a power vacuum to a degree, but natural conflicts may occur here and there on like territorial lines, things that have been redrawn. Sykes-Picot, for example, is one example, but there's many other agreements that have been created that divided people along certain lines. Even, for example, the creation of Pakistan, to me, by the British. So these types of things have occurred, and so there's little fault lines where there could be conflict. But generally speaking, these large-scale conflicts would just not exist because they're really destructive for everybody. They're not like, oh well, we're just going to come out of this unscathed. I mean, people look at Putin and saying that he's a strong man. He's a very, very strong leader, but he's not provoking war. He doesn't even, in some cases, retaliate. When the Turks first killed that Russian soldier, that was the first fatality, casualty of the Russians in Syria. He didn't start war with them. But he did do things economically that started bringing Turkey to bear, bringing his power to bear on Turkey. And then there was a seemingly like a détente or whatever between him and Erdogan, who was just a total stooge. I mean, he went with Russia for a few days, and then I don't know what kind of agreement the Americans came back with. And the reason he came to Russia at that time was because the Americans facilitated a coup against him. Unfortunately, they had underestimated how much influence and power he had. Fethullah Gulen is a CIA asset who has also an inordinate amount of influence in Turkey. But, the Erdogan family was directly involved with getting millions of dollars of oil wealth from Syria into a place, I think it's called Batman in Turkey. And so they were directly funding ISIS. And so Russia tried to bring them into, his circle in a Eurasian kind of unity, and it didn't happen for very long. It's kind of hard to discern what's really going on in that region, other than the fact that right now Turkey is definitely involved with. They created a safe zone in Syria with the United States, and now the United States is trying to provoke the situation further, especially with Hillary Clinton, if she, God forbid, gets in with a no-fly zone over Syria, which basically just means war, because Russia has to protect Syrian national sovereignty, and they have an obligation to and a right to, because just based on international law, and the United States is unilaterally going to impose a no-fly zone, and that's just going to bring the U.S. and Russia into conflict in Syria. And that's even without a false flag in the United States, which could just speed up the process of this conflict further. There's a couple other things I wanted to address. Trump and Russia. So the Clinton narrative around Trump and Russia is that Russia is kind of puppeteering Trump, which is so hilarious because Trump has never been a puppet of anyone. Trump may have agreements with people. He may, he's a brilliant diplomat in many ways, behind closed doors, not just the public version of him that you see. And so he may have, created very strong agreements with a lot of different people. Russia is just for some reason not one of them, and he doesn't have anything in Russia. The whole concept around Trump and Russia, it first piqued my curiosity when I saw an unconfirmed report that Putin was alerted by Lebanese intelligence that they had caught Saudi nationals with encrypted laptops directly connected to the Saudi governmental apparatus, which is, of course, one of the biggest terrorist outfits that exist in the world. And these encrypted laptops, they couldn't figure out what was on them, so they brought in Russia. Russia, when they decrypted these laptops, they found Donald Trump's October itinerary in that among the things that they found. And this was October of last year. So as far back as then, there are issues with, what happened between Trump and Russia. Then soon thereafter, there was a public situation where Putin mentioned Trump being the absolute leader of the American political race, how he was brilliant, how he was intelligent, and how he's clearly a successful man, clearly a successful, strong man. And so ever since then, and Trump returned the favor by calling Putin a strong leader who's beloved in his country by his people, which is true. And relative to Obama, clearly a much stronger, more decisive, more intelligent leader who has a big stake in global politics because of how much of American hegemony he's exposing and how much of their funding and training of ISIS and being basically the Air Force of ISIS. One of the things that happened more recently is that Syrian soldiers were attacked by the United States in Deir ez-Zor in Syria, and 62, I believe, were killed, and they were surrounded by ISIS at the time. So the United States government could have easily destroyed ISIS, and instead they attacked the Syrian soldiers. Now, because Russia is defending Syrian sovereignty, Russia didn't even waste any time. Within 24 hours, they blew away a giant intelligence outfit that was inside Aleppo, inside the rebel forces, inside, I believe, even a mountainside. And at least 10, if not 15 different Mossad agents were there. A handful of CIA were there, and other people were there. And this did not make it into mainstream news at all. The reason being, if you let the whole world know that Russia didn't put up with what you just did and killing Syrian soldiers, and they blew away a very important intelligence outfit that you had lodged in the area where your so-called rebels, the moderate head choppers, the real terrorists, were at, then the world is going to say, hey, are you just going to take that from Russia? So they're trying to keep everything quiet so they don't have to directly, force a conflict. And that could be partially Obama not wanting this on his legacy in terms of the full-blown World War III with Syria. But, by him facilitating and endorsing, Hillary to the extent that he has and attacking Trump, I mean, he's basically doing the same thing, whether it happens under his administration, whether it happens even in a third term that's facilitated through the Obamacare legislation and martial law, or whether it ends up being Clinton, it's the same effect. So, I mean, as far as keeping his conscience clear, it really makes it's really a moot point. But these things are happening on the ground in Syria, and Russia is definitely involved. Russia knows this, and Russia has been exposing a lot of other things of the Jewish power configuration. For example, George Soros, he has a lot of interest in Russia in terms of manipulating Russian public opinion, manipulating certain individuals, certain small groups within Russia, like a homosexual group, for example, or whoever. He brought his NGOs to bear in the academia, in universities inside of Russia, and they're now expelling just about every Soros tentacle from Russia. GMOs are rejected in Russia. Putin went after the Jewish oligarchs early in his rise, and other things. There's a lot of other things. Like, for example, recently I've heard of reports, I don't think it's confirmed, but that he evicted Jacob Rothschild's interests in Russia. So, and we know that the Jews exploited the collapse of the Soviet Union very, very well. They knew it was coming, and especially from the weapons perspective, they all those stockpiled weapons they took over and they sold to small dictatorships all around the world, and even as far as Latin America. So Putin knows that history. And Putin also knows the sensitivities around the Bolshevik era and how individuals, even during the Soviet era, have fought for Russia. So he can't sit there and, go into the, murky details of how Jews have controlled Russia for so long and their, opposition towards Orthodox Christianity. But he has elevated Orthodox Christianity to a higher platform, and he's fully aware of the pseudo-Islamic terrorist threat that they have for him, in Chechnya and other places. So, and they talk about this. I mean, these things happen behind closed doors and publicly. I mean, Bandar Bush, who was, we call him Bush because, he was so close to the Bush family, but one of the Saudi, I think he was a foreign minister or something like that. He told Russia, I think 1.5 years, 2 years ago, that if you're not careful, if you don't leave Syria alone, we're going to create an issue for you in Chechnya with the terrorists. So, he's been managing so many different conflicts, his own domestic policies and the international policies, and he's been uniting so many disparate groups. I mean, you never thought that Russia would come to the aid of Iran or Syria or whoever else, because they're literally, putting themselves at risk. Because Iran is on the agenda, Syria is on the agenda, as far as the United States ZOG, Zionist-occupied government, going in and destroying these lands. So him to come to their defense and then also create strategic agreements with, for example, China, which would come to his defense in certain key, situations, it's very profound. And I think that on a lot of levels, even if you didn't like Russia, you thought that Putin was a bad guy, you have to respect what he's done. You have to respect that he's standing up for his country. And Putin, Trump seems like is very similar in his approach, meaning stay out of international politics and intrigue and nation building elsewhere, and focus on domestic policy and make the right decisions as it relates to other conflicts. And that's why they hate him, because we don't have to have war with Russia. Even from the perspective of the white supremacists, why should one white nation fight another white nation for the Jews? Right? Even from that perspective. So there's really no logical reason for us to be at conflict with Russia. Let's say they are the source of the hack, which there's no proof of, and the Clinton administration, or Clinton group hasn't provided any evidence for. Even if that was the case, what are they exposing? They're exposing the criminality of the Democratic National Committee and also Clinton and all of her acolytes and everyone else around her, and what they've been doing for a very long time. And they have been puppets of Russia. And in many ways, they've taken money from companies and organizations that are tied to Russia, and even Putin. There was a uranium deal, I believe, that they facilitated for Russia through the Clinton Global Initiative or Clinton Foundation. So the whole Russia thing is just a total red herring. It has nothing to do with reality. It has nothing to do with anything other than we want nuclear war with Russia. And they of course don't want it. The rest of the world doesn't want it. It benefits no one except the Jews and Israel. And if we decide to go this route in electing Clinton, and obviously she's going to steal it or attempt to steal it, and there's going to be voter fraud and election fraud, and obviously even from the perspective of the media, the giant media conglomerates have fully endorsed her and lied for her and been her lackeys. And Trump is the only person who's called this out. If we allow this to happen, we are definitely on the path of nuclear war, and that's not going to be good for any of us, especially those of us who live in cities, because our cities will be eviscerated by Russia. Their technology is even superior in many instances, and they have the capacity to really cause all types of damage, and they don't want to do it. They don't want to fight us, but they are going to be forced into a corner when we provoke them with NATO and everything else. So that whole Russia-Trump angle is just total nonsense. It's to cover up what Clinton has done. And anything else you want to add on the whole Russia and Ukraine, Crimea, Syria?
Well, I think that they want to use the two superpowers to go against each other because they feel threatened. I mean, when you want to be a superpower and you have two other superpowers that are way more greater than you have to get those two superpowers to destroy each other. I mean, how can you, with 6 million people living within your country, and how can you take over the world if you have these two superpowers? So what you have to do is get them to fight each other. Get the Gentiles to fight each other. Get the Shia and the Sunni to fight each other. Get the Christians and the Muslims to fight each other. Get everybody carved up, and whether you got to balkanize countries, whatever gets them to kill off of each other, that's what you have to do. And that is the end goal. And we should never take our eyes off of this. This is the manifestation of Deuteronomy 20. Nothing more, nothing less. So what we have to do is see that and say, what is the Jews' agenda? And counter it. This is Jew versus Gentile. It's not Russia versus the United States.
That's right.
But of course, we have Gentile versus Gentile. That's what they want. And where you see the threat is, there is an honest nation. The threat is the honest people, because the whole Jewish concept is built up on lies. So when honesty comes their way, like with Trump, like with Putin, like with Iran, these are the entities that they feel threatened. So they have to create lies about them. And the reason there won't be any war I think that they're going to have to start this in Syria, because I think that Putin's too smart to take any bait in Europe. And unless they can make some clever false flag, for a long time I thought it was going to happen in Poland. I really thought, or some Eastern European country, that they were going to trigger some false flag, and then that was going to create the image, and then NATO would have to feel this obligation to go pile up on Russia. And I just think Putin's too smart to take anything on that. It's like you said with the pilot, and the pilot gets shot and he just leaves it alone.
Well, not only that, there was the Ghouta false flag in 2013 where they were already saying that Assad had chemical weapons, and he was like, "No, not really. There's really nothing that I have that I, And then they planned the attack, and then Russia stepped in very diplomatically.
But I have a theory on that. It's you remember in Anniston, Alabama, when they had to get rid of all that sarin,
mm-hmm.
And the United States was in charge of getting rid of its own contraband.
Mm-hmm.
What did they do with all that sarin? I mean, I think that they just sold that to Israel, and immediately after that, that's when the whole Assad's gassing his own people with sarin came about.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, okay, we got this problem. World bodies are making us get rid of all the sarin we have in Anniston, Alabama. Oh, yeah, but we're in charge of our own, getting rid of our own contraband. So what are we going to do? We're going to sell it to our ally. And that's the other thing I bring about that is, yes, why are we at war with Russia? Why are we at war with all these countries? When, who did 9/11? Who killed JFK? Who attacked the USS Liberty? It seems like there's one country always attacking us. And this is our ally. Meanwhile, we're supposed to be at war because the media creates this illusion of these other boogeymen.
Yeah.
And this is why we have to go fight them. And we're supposed to be this bastion of democracy. And we're going to go overthrow president who won his last election with 88% of the vote.
With 73% participation, internationally administered and monitored.
Yes. And by the way, Sunni, who oppose Assad, 64% of Syria is Sunni. So he's winning with 88% of the vote. Do the math.
A chunk of the Syrian army is
Sunni. Right. And his wife is from a Sunni family, so...
It's totally ridiculous. It's it's really sad that it's gotten to this point. Here in the United States, though, the other thing, like you had mentioned, and I think this is a subject that we should address briefly as well, is the culture of emotion and things like that where they can just provoke people with just someone's a xenophobe, someone's racist, someone's a bigot, someone's this, someone's that, and what it does is it makes people have to kind of choose. Am I going to just be the bold, provocative person who's just going to say something that everyone thinks is crazy? Or am I going to try to, within this paradigm, say what I want to say in the most nicest, in the most, softest manner and still try to get my point across? And it's proving to be practically impossible to communicate the ideas that we have without triggering these people into histrionics about nonsense it's not even real. Like the whole issue around illegal immigrants, it doesn't even help any of the United States citizens to have illegals come across. Number one, it's dangerous for them because it's a treacherous path. The people who are helping them do it are criminals because it's a crime, correct? So if you have criminals helping you, and a lot of them are drug dealers and others who have a strategic financial interest in getting people to the United States and smuggling drugs through innocent people who just want to have maybe a better life. There's a lot of injuries that they end up getting on their process of getting here because even though there's no wall, it's still very difficult and it's a treacherous terrain. And then there's reports out there, and I don't know the exact stats, but a very high number of the women that come through with these men are getting raped because, number one, they're powerless. They're already committing a crime. So who are they going to cry for help to? And I think probably on some level they already know that going in. They know that whether you want to call it rape or sex that they didn't really want to have, they're going to end up going through that process. Then when those people come here, there's a high number. It's overwhelming. It's not exactly a majority, but it is a high number for any population of rapists, of drug dealers, of these types of things coming through. Because of course you're committing a crime at the very outset. So if you're committing a crime at the very outset, what's preventing you from coming here and committing crimes here as well? Especially as lax as our police are, and as lax as our laws can be, and also we have sanctuary cities, and we have places that are overrun by these people, and they've been given much better treatment than average citizens. There's average citizens on the street homeless, and these people are provided with shelter and health care and a stipend, etc. Then they've been given the ability to vote in places like California. So you see poll numbers where Clinton is leading in California like 60-30, and you would wonder, wow, are the Californians really that stupid? Well, no. Here's the thing. There's tens of millions of illegal immigrants that are in these areas that are facilitated, and they're going to be allowed to vote. So not only is there going to be people from urban environments, let's say, where they're going to be bussed in, they're going to be given a McDonald's, McChicken or a double cheeseburger, and they're going to be taken to all these polling stations. They're going to vote numerous times, sometimes dozens of times, and there's going to be dead people voting, right, with absentee ballots. And then there's also this element of illegals being able to vote. And then you think about the fact that the New York Times is owned by a guy named Carlos Slim. I think he's now the majority owner there. And he is literally getting money from all the money transfers that go in from illegal immigrants to Mexico. So that's what's facilitated his rise, has fueled his rise. And now he gets to use the New York Times as a propaganda outlet to expand on the narratives that have been established now. So, Trump being against this is not racist at all. It has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with law and criminality. And the other fact is that some of these people have been deported numerous times. And then they come back again and again and again, and they commit crimes within the United States. They've been let out for crimes. They've raped people. They've murdered people and been able to get away with it. And so for him to bring that up, how is that racist? I mean, what about the Hispanics that they've killed? What about the black people they've killed? What about, anyone that they've killed? If you really want to look at it as a racial thing, it's not that. These are crime. This is crime, and these are criminals. And the other worst part about it is when you create a perpetual underclass that's really just basically feeding off of the rest of the people who are working and providing the tax money to do so, it creates a disharmony in society. And these people have no intention of being Americanized or helping the American state become a better place. They're here to exploit and extract the wealth and extract whatever they can, any other strategic benefit. So essentially what the Jews do is create proxy Jews, meaning all of these different groups, whether it's brown Muslims who they can manipulate through liberal ideology and manipulation of feelings and emotions, or black people that they do this to, or Mexicans that they do this to, or anyone, or even homosexuals, anyone. What they do is they create small little sub-Jews, little mini-Jews that are going around crying about this and that and the third, and saying that you're an Islamophobe if you talk about ISIS, or that you hate Mexicans if you talk about illegal immigrants, or if you talk about the very obvious, to those of us who are studying, black on white criminality and violent criminality that occurs in certain places that's not reported, that you're obviously a racist. As if just telling the truth, everything what we're talking about is the truth. The truth becomes a problem. So they use these labels to destroy people who tell the truth on any subject. So once you realize how this works, then you know that I can't address this, I can't address this, and I can't address this. And as long as I do these things, I can be elevated within this modern Jewish paradigm. But, for example, there'll be Gentiles who do really perverted art that's not really art. And they'll do this because they know that Jews in the arts and Jews facilitate the rise of art that is totally perverted, that has no basis in actual aesthetically pleasing, to the eye or anything like that. It's just destructive. Like there'll be a upside down toilet or a piss stall essentially, and it'll be turned upside down, and that's art. And a lot of other things, nakedness just becoming art. It's so many other things that they do. And so individual Gentiles see this paradigm and they're like, well, here's an opportunity for me to rise and me to come up top. So for example, within the Muslim world, there's a lady named Irshad Manji who's a lesbian who doesn't even pray. So both of those things are antithetical to Islam. Yet she's elevated as someone that's a moderate voice in the Muslim world, here to fix the Muslim world. And similarly among the Christians, there was it Hagee, I believe, that said, who was a fat guy, a really fat guy, very prominent. I think it was Hagee. He said that Christ was not the Messiah, that Jesus was not the Messiah, and that actually the Jews are the chosen people. And that Jesus was just a figurehead essentially, and he's basically destroying the very premise of Christianity, and when you elevate the Jews as the chosen people, then that means that no matter what they do, you have to kind of endorse it, and they kind of can avoid God's wrath because they're God's chosen people. They can do no wrong, and what it's done is it's destroyed the Christian morality over the last 100 years in the Western nations, and as a result, it's a tacitly atheistic society. And when you have an atheistic society, there's dog eat dog. You do whatever is in your best interest. You never think about the collective, any identity. It could be, your nation, America, or it could be, if you think of yourself as white or Polish or whatever, you're not doing anything for them. You're not doing anything for, maybe even your local region. You really are basically a tool of the Jews. and they'll give you whatever you want. They'll give you whether it's money that you want, fame, whatever it is. Everybody has a price, and they usually will lead with the carrot. The stick only comes much later whenever you have something to lose. So a lot of us, we work normal jobs. So if we are out here in the public talking about these subjects, they can come after us in our jobs. That's why they want us to identify ourselves publicly, so then they can find out where we work, and then they tell our bosses, hey, so-and-so is a xenophobe, or so-and-so is a racist, or whatever, and we need to, you need to get rid of them, because we're going to bring pressure to bear on you. So what is one person who's just a cog in a giant corporation? They'll toss you out. So this is the kind of pressure tactics that they've used, and that's why the majority of the American population is very quiet and not talking about all these issues, and they need to be addressed. These things, have to be addressed. And the other thing is that you have to create broad-based coalitions. That's what they do. When you talk about the unions, or you talk about Saul Alinsky and their organizing, that's what they do. They create a coalition based on something else. So you have, a very colorful coalition made up of all different types of people, but they're all being manipulated by the Jews. And because they're getting a strategic benefit from the Jews, whether it's in unions and labor or whatever, they will defend the Jews from attack. So if I attack the Jews, they'll say, what are you talking about? They're helping us organize. Mm-hmm. I know black people right now that work in the south side of Chicago, and they have great interests in mind, and they have a great intent. But the problem is Jews are facilitating whatever they're trying to accomplish. So they feel like these are our strategic allies against this nebulous white dominant power structure.
False savior, yeah.
Yeah. So I just feel like, one of the things that we don't ever get a chance to really talk about is these false coalitions that occur. I mean, I have nothing to do with a Muslim who's going to tacitly endorse this antagonism of Russia. I don't care what they say. I'm from Afghanistan, and Russia in history has invaded Afghanistan and occupied Afghanistan and eventually left. And so, I mean, there's no reason for me to be so Russophilic. But, the fact of the matter is they're standing on truth. And Putin is standing on truth. So I have to endorse him. And if he tomorrow turns around and does something that's totally outlandish and against truth, then I'm going to have to reject that. But the point of it is that these alliances, they should be based on principles. They should be based on things that are universal. Justice is a universal concept, and we all know it. And we all know that without people paying a penance for what they've done in this world, they're either going to continue to go the wrong direction, or they'll do something so crazy that it'll affect all the rest of us. So when we see a conflict somewhere else and we don't talk about it, and we're just like, oh, well, it's not me, eventually it will come to you. Like right now, we're at the brink of nuclear war with Russia. Some of us live in cities. They will eviscerate our cities. Mm-hmm. We will die.
Absolutely.
This is not a video game. This is not some, at least Clinton has a better tone. Is this tone really going to matter if we all get blown up in a nuclear war? No, absolutely not. And this destructiveness is inherent at the core of Judaism. So the reason why this is even taking place in the world is because of that. Is because of that macabre, mentality of the Jews, because they feel like they have to destroy everything. They're not the builders of society. In fact, they give each other the Nobel Prize for so many different things. But ultimately, and for example, think about the three most destructive weapons of the last century. They were all created by Jewish interests. The atomic bomb, the nuclear bomb, and the hydrogen bomb. All created by Jews. Why? Because they're destructive things. And they weren't created in the sense of science, but they were managed, and the ultimate end was placed there. And so that's what they've contributed to history. That's what they've contributed to the modern world.
And it helps to have a Gentile front. It helps to have an Enrico Fermi. It helps to have that Gentile front. Oh, no, it was him. I mean, yes, Einstein, they claim, Einstein was a complete fraud, but they put him with the Manhattan Project. But the thing about that is it's all a fraud. To be careful when the forces that pushed you down are the ones that pick you up.
Yes. Like black folks by the Jews.
Right.
Slave trade.
Yes.
Slave ships that they ran. The fact that they wouldn't sell slaves on Saturday. The ones and they owned the most slaves. And they were the most antagonistic towards the freedom of slaves. And then they created the NAACP. They created all of those redress organizations that are going to be asking for reparations, etc. Where there's these house black folks that are basically puppeteered by Jews. In the NAACP for 70 years, they couldn't even have a black leader. So that's insane. That's your black organization that is not allowed to have a black leader.
And most people,
the UNIA was an actual organic black organization created by Marcus Garvey, and they got him out. And they created a tax situation where they could malign him.
They always shun the black nationalist, yes.
Absolutely.
And one of the things that a lot of people identify the NAACP with W.E.B. Du Bois, and he left after 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he abandoned a lot of his he was learning on the job, essentially. And,
essentially, yeah.
And he's like, oh, wow, this isn't for me. It's like, and he detaches it, but history attaches his name still to it.
Yes.
And that's a major problem, but he was like the one black guy that they attached to the NAACP. And
they're doing the same thing now with Black Lives Matter. I mean, you have these people in the UK protesting Black Lives Matter in the UK. I don't even know if the black people are generally persecuted in the UK. I mean, I don't even know what kind of contingency you could even create there where, these people are very angry about what's happening. And they're going in and shutting down Heathrow Airport for what? That affects other black people. That affects passengers, and travel. Within Islam, the concept of travel is like a piece of hell because it's difficult and there's arduous, especially before. But like even now, with all the kind of scrutiny you go under when you go into the airports, and the constant threat of an ISIS type that does something. I mean, it's already an arduous thing, and then now you're going to go in and block these people, or you go in the middle of traffic in a very high traffic time and block a highway and have a poster. I mean, there could be people that already endorse the idea that Black Lives Matter or whatever, and they may not be aware, and now you're going to make them angry at black people for no reason. You see? And so that's one of the key tactics. Like, why don't these people go to the Federal Reserve and demand reparations? Like, imagine if millions of black people it was a coordinated effort to go to all the Federal Reserve banks all across the United States and just camp outside and demand reparations. Can you imagine what would happen? The media wouldn't talk about it. Nobody would talk about it. And then let's say the leaders of these organizations, if they got on the microphone and they said, hey, we know that the Rothschild dynasty has exploited us the most, and there's a lot of other people that have exploited, but as black people, we're here to demand reparations from them because of their exploitation. Can you imagine what would happen? So that's why these people don't do these things, because a guy like Soros, who's worth tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, is facilitating all of these different things by financing people. And once you finance someone, I mean, then it's not even a real thing. I mean, if you really want to have an organic revolution, you can't be financed by someone who's a international parasite. I mean, what kind of revolution are you going to have, And that's what George Soros has done, is he created, revolutions in dozens of places all around the world, fake, color revolutions. And, with his NGO and his influence and, the Open Society Foundation and others, I mean, they've literally created an empire throughout the globe where they do so many different things. I mean, here in the United States, they're affecting our elections with election fraud and different things that they're doing to manipulate public opinion. And if you look at the emails, Soros is in there dozens of times, and
well, behind the Assad narrative, the primary source for him gassing his own people was Human Rights Watch. Mm-hmm. He pretty much owns Human Rights Watch.
That's exactly it.
And that should make everybody's head go up, and that should, fireworks should go off when you read that. It's like Soros runs Human Rights Watch. Where is all the information coming from about Assad gassing his own people? Human Rights Watch, and the Human Rights Watch exports it to the mainstream media, and then they run with it, and they take it as a source. So, but one of if we would just wake up just a little bit. And we would see with Soros, it's like anything Soros touches, maybe we should avoid.
Right, like what Russia does.
Right, so maybe the Jews, if we wake up just a little bit, maybe the Jews are making a mistake by having Soros' name touched all this stuff without a buffer. Mm-hmm. Because eventually, if we all wake up and Soros touches it, oh, wow, we need to walk away from this because Soros touched it. Yeah. Then maybe he needs to buffer somewhere and get a Gentile buffer.
It's funny because we didn't know, but a lot of people didn't know. And Soros has now become a household name. Mm-hmm. Same with Saul Alinsky. And that, I think, is one of the reasons why they're giving the internet away, because what they've realized is that this thing is an exponential thing. Like with an individual like you and I, if we wake up, we're not going backwards. We're going to keep going in that direction, and we're going to take other people with us. You know, it may take a while to convince such and such person, but over time, as they keep keep expanding their agenda, and it starts to become more and more manifestly clear, people are going to say, hey, so-and-so told me about this many years ago, and now it's taking place.
But a great indicator of the power of Soros is you look at someone like Sheldon Adelson, who's almost taken a back seat to him because, like, he... in 2012, he gave $100 million. Sheldon Adelson gave $100 million to Mitt Romney's campaign. Mm-hmm. Did Mitt Romney get in the White House? No. The Soros-backed candidate got in. And you look now, obviously Rubio was supposed to be the guy. Mm-hmm. And Rubio didn't get in. Nope. So this Adelson money that people freaks out about doesn't seem to really get anywhere.
No. It never came to Trump. That's a whole lie. I mean, I don't even know if a penny of it made there.
Oh, if he's given $10 million and he gave $100 million to Mitt Romney, okay, fine. I mean, when a guy has $30 billion and he gives $10 million, who cares? I mean,
that's if that even happened. And the thing about it is,
it's like you giving me $2. You know?
Well, even for me, it would be like 50 cents or something.
Yeah. Okay. What I'm saying.
Yeah. But you're absolutely right. It's a monumental fraud, and the thing about the awakening is that it's really gotten really fast. And like, honestly, about 75% of the Clinton criminality I didn't know about until 6 months ago. I mean, I knew about some of it. I knew there was drug running in Arkansas. I knew that he was raping females. I knew that they were taking corporate money, and I knew that there was some murders associated with them. But the rest of it, it's been because number one, there's a media push. Number two, people are realizing the mainstream media is totally controlled. So now it's being subsidized by the billionaires who own it to prevent, like a total collapse, because who's going to run the narrative then? And everybody's getting their information off the internet, which is, again, I think why they're going to start doing stuff about it. But it's been so transformative, this whole election cycle. And it's because of who Trump is. It's because he says things. I've learned things from Trump that I would never learn from any other politician, and I fancy myself as someone who's actually studied this stuff, and I know a lot of it. But Trump has introduced new concepts, and he's brought up things that nobody else would dare bring up, and it's so revolutionary to witness. Even if he doesn't win, or if it's stolen from him or whatever, or they kill him, he has created a revolution that has roots now. His daughter, for example, can run for president. His two sons, especially his older son, can run for president now. And these people are awake because there's something going on. See, one of the things that Trump talks about is Lincoln. He talks about Douglas MacArthur. He talks about George Patton. The reason why he mentions these people is because, for one reason or another, they have had run-ins with the Rothschild-backed internationalist project, globalist project, and he has openly declared war on these people. I mean, he's talking about term limits for people in Congress. He's talking about getting the lobbying money out of politics. He's talking about so many different things that would totally change things, especially states' rights. I think people look at that as like a racist issue. It's not a racist issue. What it does is it prevents the federal government from being this open, giant bureaucracy that, funnels and steals all your money and basically gives it to the Jews.
Well, that's how the United States was Judaified in the first place. Was the original concept of Jeffersonian America was that basically the 13 colonies were individual countries under a constitution, or under that time the Articles of Confederation. And under the Articles of Confederation, there wasn't even a position of president. There was I forget the title, but it was a president, but it was very similar to our Speaker of the House, where he basically ran the Congress. And that was the whole point. It was the Jews who brought in the Federalist movement, and John Adams, who was a very corrupt lawyer. I know a lot of people like to glorify him, but his boy was Alexander Hamilton. And for some reason, George Washington always had the back of Alexander Hamilton,
who was a Rothschild agent.
Absolutely, and probably a Jew. He went to Jewish schools and things like that. Mm-hmm. So probably. I
always thought so, but I wasn't sure.
It's one of those things. He probably was a Jew, but had to hide it a little bit because there was a lot of Jewish hatred in the original United States. So maybe he kept that under wraps a little bit. But he was the one behind the Jewish concept of central banking, and he was also the Federalist movement, where you create them all under you create like a national, but it's not nationalism. And that one of the things that I think really ruined the United States was, for some reason, they found a way to put Thomas Jefferson in France for 6 years as Minister of France. In that time, that was the time that the Constitution was crafted. The concepts, the great concepts that we enjoy and we love about the original United States were from the brain of Thomas Jefferson and basically from John Locke philosophy. And
they also said that he took elements from the Quran too, in terms of like.
Yeah, there's a lot of rumors that he was a closet Muslim.
Well, he definitely had a Quran that he studied.
Mm-hmm. Well, like any great spiritual person, you study all religious things. I think all Muslims should read the Bible.
Right.
I think that they should all read the teachings of Buddha. They should all read. You can't study history without studying religion. That's bottom line. Mm-hmm. And the great concepts of original America came from Thomas Jefferson. Now, what our framework and our everything about the original United States is supposed to be in that Constitution. Mm-hmm. But the guy who created the original idea of what the United States was embodied was in France for 6 years. During that time, that Constitution was crafted, and the Bill of Rights. Mm-hmm. The Bill of Rights were ratified and were sent off to be ratified on September 25th, 1789. October 1789, Thomas Jefferson comes back from France to the United States. Little suspicious about all that. You call me a conspiracy theorist or whatever you want about that. Mm-hmm. I really have to say that there is something behind that he was systematically kept in France for those 6 years. And that is because the Constitution, there are major flaws in it that you really have to question. Like, why does it take 2/3 of Congress to overturn a presidential veto? Which you pretty much have done, and with giving him a vague title of commander-in-chief, is you've created a monarchy for the president, where he can do anything at will and power, and this Congress is a bit of an illusion. Mm. And the only thing that really keeps the president from having a monarchy is that he has this press that he has to appease. Mm. And if he didn't have that, then he could do whatever he wants. But now you look and see how the presidents do the most destructive things without even having to consult Congress. And then when they do consult Congress, now you have a Judaified Congress also, you can kind of manipulate whatever you want. Because all you really have to do with the Constitution is buy off 1/3 of your Congress and the president. Because once you've done that, you can get whatever you want because you're not going to overturn the veto. So you have to be very suspicious, because that was the whole point of the Declaration of Independence, was that there was this evil monarch and he was overstepping his bounds and all of this. Now you just created a monarchy within your Constitution. Mm-hmm. Jefferson would not have been for that. And I think Jefferson was trying to work against that. I mean, Jefferson was the one who essentially ended slavery, because in 1807 he said you couldn't bring slaves into the country. But they found a way around that, and there's a slave trading port in Maine. Mm-hmm. So the Federalist movement should be seen as a Judaic movement. And what we should see is it was 13 individual nationalisms under one framework of a rights protection. That's what the United States was supposed to be. They wanted this Judaified Constitution. We like to glorify the Constitution, especially libertarians, but it's a major flawed document. And if we're not going to obey it, maybe we should look into restoring a Constitution that we want, and a Constitution that we would really like to fight for. Because maybe that's why we don't have a passion in the United States, and why we don't have a framework, and why we don't have a united ideal. Is because we don't have a government that represents that nationalism. What does American culture represent? What does American culture even mean anymore? That's why we don't have nationalism in the United States.
Right. It's such a hodgepodge of so many different people who have so many different cultural backgrounds, and then there's nothing indigenous about our culture anymore. It's manufactured, and it doesn't. There's nothing that permeates through all of these different people and their cultural experience to unite everyone. So there's so many different ways to divide it. It's just a hodgepodge.
And there were unique characteristics among the states. Like Pennsylvania was the Quaker state, and you have a united idea. I love the concept of religious states. A lot of people don't like them. A lot of people like the glorification of secularism, which I think is destructive. Mm-hmm. I like religious nationalism because it's a soul-based thing. You have a united ideal, and you already have united beliefs. So if you get behind that. And one of the things about like in Arab countries, and they're so critical of Iran, what you should look at Iran as a template of what you should be doing. But I think so many of them see Saudi Arabia as their Sunni Iran, which is stupid. But like you should get together and create old Balad Sham, whatever you want to call it. Mm-hmm. Get together. I mean, the last time they had any type of movement like that was with Nasser and Pan-Arabism. Mm-hmm. There's nothing like that right now.
Right.
And if
Gaddafi tried to do something like resurrect something like that in Africa, and of course they killed him and sodomized him while they did it.
Yeah, and you could see why they kill him after that. Okay, these are signs of what the Jews actually fear. So maybe it's actually a sign of what actually works. Mm-hmm. So, let's go for it. I mean, Nasser had no air force. That's the only reason Israel won any of the wars against Egypt.
Right.
Because if it were just a pure land war, I think Egypt would have stood their ground. But
yeah. Well, it's been a good show. We're close to almost 2.5 hours now. So is there anything else, any other subjects that you feel like maybe we should address? Anything related to University of Chicago or in terms of the Frankfurt School you had mentioned? It became a second outpost after the Columbia University.
Yeah, just to remember that these are created by the Trojan Wasp Rockefellers, two major schools, and keep your eye out for everything that they touch. Much like we said with Soros, look at everything that University of Chicago touches. Look at everything Columbia University touches. It's the same usual suspects touching everything. And when you look at these same people and same clues, it's the major clue right there. The nuclear reactor and how that led to nuclear weapons. University of Chicago. Saul Alinsky, University of Chicago. Libertarianism with Frederick Hayek, University of Chicago. University of Columbia, New Age movement, hippie movement, from Dewey and Marcuse. Okay, everything that they're touching, maybe we should reinvestigate and say, something's wrong with this. I mean, even Eisenhower was the president of Columbia University after World War II until he became president. Mm-hmm. So let's look at these spots. I mean, look at the same names. It's Soros, University of Chicago, Columbia University, the Arabs coming from the Israeli Mossad. Just look at these same things. It's the same mechanism happening over and over. The same thing that's created Al-Qaeda is the same thing that creates al-Nusra. It's the same thing that creates 9/11. It's the same thing. So everything's coming from the same spot. And why aren't we picking up on this? Mm-hmm. And if we would learn to explain our reasoning behind everything, I think explanations tear down lies. They create understanding. And that is the weapon that we have to use against them. It's explanation. You explain your feelings, explain your emotions. Explain why you don't like Donald Trump. Explain that.
They can't do it. The most intelligent people, the most supposedly, from a secular perspective or from, just an intellectual perspective, the people who are so-called educated, they simply cannot explain their hatred and animosity and fear of Donald Trump at all. They're like, well, what about what he says about Mexicans? I'm like, what did he say about Mexicans? What did he say? Go ahead, tell me, quote him. When it comes to Muslims, what did he say? What did he say? Can you give me a quote? Well, one quote was like he wants to put a temporary ban on Muslims entering the United States. I'm like, look, man, if these things are being done by ISIS or whoever, right? I mean, don't these people, don't anyone have a right to be able to be worried about it or fearful of it, And then that's your opportunity as a Muslim to, hey, I'm not going to let Donald Trump be a bigger revolutionary than myself because I have the Quran and I believe in the one God and the one humanity. So I should be the one telling the truth that Donald Trump is telling. I should be ahead of him. He has a lot more to lose. I'm not a billionaire, so I don't have much to lose by me compared to him. He has a lot more money, a lot more prestige, a lot more, and he has in a lot of ways. People used to have a great reputation around Donald. He's like a self-made man, kind of funny, kind of colorful. Now they think he's like a baby raping, baby eater, monster, and it's totally manufactured. It's totally contrived. It's not something that they can actually prove. It's not something that you can pinpoint certain policies of his. I've heard from so many people in the last week, his policies, he's always telling the truth. I like his policies. I like a lot of his ideas. I like his ideas on immigration, or I like his ideas on, Russia and not fighting this. But man, why did he have to call her a nasty woman? How come he can't act presidential? And I'm sitting there like, that's what you should love about him, because her answers are canned. That she's pre-scripted everything, and the moment she gets off that stage, she's going to go to sleep for 20 hours. This woman is on her last throes of life. This woman almost collapsed at the 9/11 memorial on 9/11 of 2016. So she's not doing this for herself. This is more for the people behind her. So they're going to take over even more than they've already taken over the United States government once she gets in. She's going to be a figurehead. She's going to do what they tell her. I mean, for her to say, what penance do I owe you to a Rothschild heir? That's all you need. You don't need anything else. There shouldn't be anything else that should be after spoken about.
Keep in mind, when you talk about the Lynn Forrester thing, what are the first 3 words of the Balfour Declaration? Dear Lord Rothschild. The whole concept of Israel was created from a letter from a cabinet member to a Rothschild.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that shows you the power right there.
Exactly. And that's it. And imagine if you start waking up the people and you tell them, I have a song with Jonathan Mad Code that I mentioned at some point. The Rothschild clan will be hung in the streets of London and Paris. And I think that that's going to happen at some point. I don't know about hung or however they're going to, execute them for treason, but the kind of destruction that they've put the whole world through, and white people too. I mean, when people say, when white people are getting angry, let's say in America towards all these other people, it's like just redirect your anger. Because honestly, I mean, one of the things that I will give the Muslim world credit for historically is that they didn't really allow Jews to just take over and destroy things. I mean, you could argue in the Ottoman Empire, that's one place. But for the most part, they let them live. They didn't persecute them or murder them or anything. But they were not allowed to just go run amok. They were not allowed to spread child sex slavery. They were not allowed to, create a usurious, empire based on total fraud and then destroy everyone around them.
There's 10,000 Jews in Tehran, Iran right now. I mean,
yeah. So, I mean, they've not been allowed to act this way before in history. It's the European nation and then America that has allowed this. So whenever you and your people have allowed this, you have to go and extract these people, pull them out of their positions of power and privilege that you gave them the platform for. They didn't have this platform before. It's their intermarriage and their control of the banking systems. And then, now you're the junior partners in colonialism and imperialism. So you think, oh, look at us. We're so strong and amazing. We're going to destroy those backward brown savages in all these lands. But you're doing it on the back of this Rothschild usury system. Mm-hmm. So once you extract these people and say, oh, by the way, you're attached to this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy, how about we just execute you guys? You know what I mean? For what you've done, the destructive things that you've done, and you could have a trial and you could do all of that. I mean, whatever you need to do, but it's literally very small people and they're holding the whole world hostage. All of us are going to suffer as a result. And it's spineless acquiescence to the Jews that's really creating this thing. These people are cowards. In 2009, I had just started a position at, a big corporation. And I left in the middle of the day because this was 2008, actually. This was, I forgot the name of that particular massacre. But you know how the Israelis go in every 2 years or so and just go in and mow down Palestinians. So this is 2008, I think it was December of 2008, and I left. And I went and joined a rally that was happening in downtown Chicago. And when I went there, I saw a group of Jews counter-protesting the protesters. And there was maybe like 12 of them in there. And by this point, I think the massacre had reached 1,000 people. And of course, the overwhelming majority, innocent civilians, non-combatants. And there was only one Israeli that had been killed in that entire time. So I yelled. There was these 5 Jews standing in one circle holding up stupid signs. And I just walked out up to him and I yelled in his face. I said, 1,000 to 1? 1,000 to 1? And I kept looking at him. And he didn't have nothing to say. He couldn't look at me. Mm-hmm. So imagine, not just me, but tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people around the world making these people uncomfortable. Because they're already uncomfortable. That's why they have a guy like Max Blumenthal, who's directly attached to Sidney Blumenthal, his father, who was the architect, one of the architects, if not the main architect of the Libya debacle, where, you know, Gaddafi was taken out and the destruction and the Benghazi and all that situation. That was Sidney Blumenthal. And his son is now the leading proponent of free Palestine? Why? How?
You know, that's the problem, though, is when you talk about, like, those few, like, 10 Jews that you were talking to, those are the Likudian Jews.
Right.
The smart globalist George Soros type Jew, he's in there with the crowd with you.
Yes.
He's the one,
exactly,
the Jews for Palestine.
Right.
It's like, yes, let's work towards it.
Jewish voice for peace.
Jewish voices for peace. And we're going to work to it. It's not a Jewish problem. It's these freaking Zionists over here, these Likudians. And if they would just tone down their stuff, you know, it's like, just give us a small land. You know, we deserve it. Holocaust, Holocaust, Holocaust. And that's, they feel they are entitled to that. And, like, you know, we just want this little slim land because we've been kicked out of all these countries. Oh, poor us. And, you know, we're part of you. You know, we get kicked out. They get kicked out. It's like, hey, you know, we're buds. And then that's what the Jews do. They unite. They find there's the common ground. You know, hey, we got the same enemy here.
Yeah.
It's not Jews because they're Jews and I'm against them.
Colonialist, imperialist, white supremacist, cisgender, heteronormative, patriarchy. That's our enemy.
Yeah.
Let's get them.
Yeah. But if the Old Testament had not overtaken Christianity, they wouldn't believe in the concept of the Hamite. So there wouldn't be racist racialism within Christianity. Had not the Old Testament and the Hamite concept taken over, because they felt like they could take slaves. And that was the whole thing, was all the corruptions of Christianity come from the Old Testament, which I say this 1,000%, no Christian at all should ever have any relevance to the Old Testament. It is a Jewish storybook. Because
exactly.
Testament means covenant. Jesus, when he came, made a new covenant. So when he makes that new covenant, it's not Old Testament as old in chronological order before. It's old as in irrelevant. It's the irrelevant testament. This is the New Testament right here. And this is what is relevant. And nothing before this should matter. But all the corruption within Christianity has come because they've bought into the concept of the Old Testament. It should have no bearing. It's a Jewish storybook. I mean, why should you care? But if you look at, like, the book of Matthew, it becomes very Jewish compatible, and the book of Luke is definitely Jewish compatible. But John, it really has nothing to do with it, and Mark has written like Cliff Notes, but it's not. Christianity should have no compatibility. But Saul of Tarsus came in and took it, and it's made it basically a combination of paganism and Judaism, using the teachings of Jesus thrown in as like the little sweet worm on the hook type thing. And that's what it is. It's a hybrid of many religions. And if you take the Pauline element out and you take that Protestant element out, and you have true Christianity, which pretty much is what Orthodox Christianity is, and traditional Catholicism is, then it cures the problem. Read your Old Testament to find out what your enemies are planning to do with you. And then that's it. That's the only reason you should ever read the Old Testament. And it should have no relevance. If you want the corrected version of the Old Testament, read the Quran. Because that's what it is. It's the decoder ring for the Old Testament. It corrects the Old Testament.
Yeah, and then throughout religion, I mean, that's the main thing that, you can find is that anything that is godly in origin or from God in origin, you will find in just about every book. And still, even to this day, despite the fact that all these books have been interpolated, they still have remnants of the original divine source, because no matter how much they interpolate, there's certain things that will be revealed. Like in the Old Testament to this day, in Deuteronomy, in chapter 33, verse 2, I believe, it says that if a preacher will come from the Mount Paran, and he will have a fiery law and 10,000 saints with him. And that was Prophet Muhammad, who came with 10,000 people and conquered Mecca without any blood being shed, and he had a law. He had a new book of law. And so those types of things, even though they're in there, and even though the book has been interpolated, it's still in there. And same thing with, even if you look at Taoism and you look at what is it called, the Tao Te Ching. Mm-hmm. There's many of those things that parallel the Quran in there. And so one of the things I tell people are like, religion is this and organized religion is that, and blah blah blah, and how do we know about God? I said, look, talk to God directly yourself. You have a language, you have whatever, and at the end of the day, at some point, God forbid, in the middle of an accident, or you're on a ship and there's a big storm. I mean, God talks about that in the Quran too. You're gonna cry out. It's just like a natural impulse. Oh God, in a tough situation. Anyway, so why not proactively just talk to him? Because nobody needs to know. If you're one of those people who's like afraid of being religious or being considered religious, or, oh wow, you believe in God, you think he's an invisible friend of yours, okay, that's cool. You don't have to do it in front of them, but do it privately. Talk to him privately. And if he doesn't exist, what did you lose? You lost a couple seconds of saying a couple words. But if he does exist, then you may benefit not only for yourself, but in clarity. One of the things that people wonder, like when I talk to people, I'm pretty strict about justice and truth, and people wonder where that comes from. I think it comes from God and having some type of relationship with God, because I can see through nonsense really easily. Like, there was no reason for me to know that this giant situation that happened in Chicago was against Trump, where they shut down his free speech. It was, Jewish in origin, but I've seen the pattern, and the Jews don't manipulate me with nonsense. A lot of the Muslims that get manipulated by this stuff, I bet you a lot of them do not pray the 5 daily prayers. And I mean, that's not my business, but at the same time, that creates like a very strong awareness in my heart that, hey, this is I'm doing this for God, and I have a direct connection with God. And so as a result, one of the things that God is the light. So you will have a personal light that you walk around with, and it's going to vary to different degrees with different people, but you won't be easily manipulated if you have a relationship with the Most High. And you can have that in whatever form you want to have it in your private life. You don't have to expose it to anyone. You don't have to talk about it. Most of the people who talk about their faith and like lead with their faith and wear it on their sleeve and talk about how wonderful of a Christian they are or how much they believe usually have a lot of other issues. They're usually hypocrites, etc. Because when you have that, you don't need to tell anyone, and it permeates your soul, and people interact with you and they can tell that there's something different about you, and honestly, you're a better person for it. And one of the things that it will help you is clarity and understanding. Number one, what are your human drives and how to channel them in the proper way to extract the most benefit, right? And prevent the detrimental effects of our lower animal selves, where we have certain instincts to survive or procreate or whatever, and we cannot allow those to supersede our soul and what we're supposed to be doing on earth. And we all have different abilities and different traits and characteristics and aptitudes that we can use for the benefit of all. And actually, I mean, for people who are well-adjusted individuals, healthy individuals from a spiritual perspective, that's the most satisfying thing you can do, is provide something to the universe, provide something to your immediate surroundings that no one else can provide, and that gives you more joy than, self-flagellating your ego or, buying things or anything that has like a minimal purpose. It has really no real purpose. Satisfying your own ego will not make you as happy as satisfying the need of someone else that you have been given the opportunity to be able to provide, which is a very charitable thing to do anyway. So all of these things, I mean, they didn't come from nowhere. There's a reason why a guy like Lenin existed, and there's a reason like a woman like Mother Teresa existed. There's a reason why they're so polar opposites of each other, you know, and diametrically opposed, let's say. So that in and of itself is a way that you can intuitively discern that there must be a heaven and hell, and that it would occur here on this very earth first. A guy like Ariel Sharon had said that he was going to make the Palestinians suffer before he killed them, meaning he wasn't just going to kill them, but he was going to make them torture them. And guess what happened to Ariel Sharon? He had a coma for over 6 years, which means he was being tormented while he was still in this physical plane. And then he passed on. So you consider, you know, how these things take place. And you know, if you start to develop your spiritual eye, which comes from your connection with the Most High, the divine, however you see it, however you want to perceive it, however you even want to communicate with him. Because if the Most High exists, he'll have those high attributes of extreme love, extreme mercy, extreme forgiveness. And so you could have committed just about any crime in the past, but as long as you're genuinely repentant, God has the authority and the ability to forgive you, cleanse you of your impurities, and draw you close to him. And by doing that, you will start to reflect those attributes in your daily life, and people will be attracted to that. You know, there's no greater light. I mean, that's why there's individuals who stand up to the Jews, and they're remembered throughout the history, even if the Jews get away with killing them. You know, like Sergei Yesenin. We know that they killed him. They said that he committed suicide. We know from his poetry that they couldn't, that he couldn't have killed himself. You know, but now we, like for example, me and Jonathan, we know who he is, and we respect his contribution to the global politics and global history and Gentile resistance to organized Jewry. And to me, anyone who does these things, they're driven by a higher motivation, because there's really no benefit in it. I mean, you know, this equipment, for example, that we're doing this podcast on, this costs money, and I had to spend money that I, you know, gained through other work in order to do this. And as far as money in the world, you know, they've kind of created monopolies where people don't even have free money to give and contribute to, you know, donate to things like this. So it's something that, you know, you can't just do these things unless, you know, there is some higher motivation that's beyond your own ego, beyond your own soul. And I feel like the more people start to reflect that and realize that, I mean, we can just simply check out of their system, because their system is based on our acquiescence and our endorsement. The moment we pull out of it and say, I don't think so, I'm not really into like murdering the whole planet for you guys, it's really not going to do anything for me. You know, if everybody turns around and does that, we all of a sudden will see the Jew that's in the room and say, wait a second, why are we doing this? I mean, I don't have anything against you. I don't have anything against him. Why are you going in between us and creating this unnecessary conflict? You know, and the more the people shine the light on that group, the more they're forced to take on different masks, and like Jewish Voice for Peace will erupt, and a guy like Gilad Atzmon will pop on the scene where he's talking about just about everything, and you're like, damn, this guy's a good Jew. And then he's connected to Janet Yellen and Menachem Atzmon, two arguably among the most powerful Jews that are in existence, and he's direct relatives with them, and he doesn't tell you. A guy like Gentile Christopher Bolin, who's a relentless researcher, has to tell you, by the way, hey, you know, what's going on with that? And he didn't even say it in an antagonistic way. And, you know, and then Atzmon will reluctantly say, oh, yeah, well, you know, I got some relatives and I feel guilty about it and whatever. Oh, yeah, you felt so guilty. Why didn't you say anything? You know? And so, you know, we start to realize, and it's not that we want to kill them all or persecute them or gas them or turn them into lampshades and soap. I mean, it's really just about, you know, we're not doing with all the stuff that you want us to do anymore, because you need us to do what you're trying to do. And once we check out, you know, it's it. You can't get away with this anymore.
Yeah, they're like anywhere from between 16 to 40 million people. We're 7 billion. Why are we letting them into it? Why are always the 12 heads of the Federal Reserve Jewish? Why are we now in a situation where we could have 4 to 5 Supreme Court justices who are Jews? I mean, there's an overrepresentation. Look at Congress. Look at the
broadcast media.
Dual citizenship. Yes, absolutely. You have 96% of all the media in the world owned by 6 Jewish corporations. So you have this overrepresentation of these 16 to 40 million people when we're 7 billion.
Everywhere.
how does this happen except for the fact that they control the money system? But the thing about it is you cannot cheat reality. And any society that doesn't enforce a meritocracy is doomed to fail. And you can take any job in the world and put it into two labels: parasitic middleman and producer. And the Jews always gravitate towards the parasitic middleman jobs. They're the prescription writer, they're the lawyer, they're the jobs we really don't need to have a functional society.
Right.
But they take all the money off of the top and leave the producers poor as they can be.
Yep. Just look at the farmers, for example, and all of these different
Absolutely. They have an illusion of farmer. That's why it's ironic that the original name of the Rothschild family was Bauer, which is farmer in German. It's like, come on. What job is more important than farmer? You need food.
That's right.
Then you need people to make your clothes. Do the Jews gravitate towards those jobs? No, they might own the textile mill that makes the clothes. They might buy the corporate farmer.
Manufactured fiat currency that came from nowhere.
Right. They might buy the supermarket that buys up the thing that the farmer did, and they might influence the farmer, and he might try to manipulate the crops that he grows and all that. But he's never the farmer. He's never the one that actually grows the stuff. He's never anything you need in society. Even in the law profession, the paralegal does most of the work, but the lawyer shows up in court every day in a suit and, argues a little bit and uses a little mind tricks, and they take all the money off of the top. The nurse sits there with the patient most of the time, is the one probably giving most of the injections, probably doing most of the, and I'm talking about ER doctors, they do a lot of work too. But the doctors that actually make a lot of money are the ones who write your prescriptions and all that. Yes, surgeons deserve the money they make. But, there is an overabundance of surgery too, so not like plastic surgeons, but you can...
just look at the banking apparatus and what's facilitated. Look at Wall Street. Look at all the different corporate heads. These people, they don't do much. They don't offer much of value. And that's a very important point to remember, is that when you look at how things work, it's easy to blame anyone else, because you'll find corporate leaders who are Gentile. You'll find people within governments that are Gentile, and they'll do things that, Jews typically do. But if you look at the thread that permeates everything, it's theirs, and it's theirs. It's almost like a calling card. If you can find those types of things, you can find these people. People say, like, for example, in the hip hop industry, I'm a hip hop artist. People will say, well, that's what sells. And I'm like, no, because 20 years ago, before we had all this technology, which has facilitated a huge information transfer and education on so many different subjects, people were talking about very relevant things and conscious things before they had access to all this information and knowledge. Why is it now that we have more information and more knowledge and more opportunities for education and more opportunities in general, that the worst, absolute worst, non-musically talented people are being elevated, and that they're saying things and perpetuating things that really have no basis in, like, for example, how does it benefit the urban environment to sell crack? You can have the exploiter, who is the drug dealer, who is basically someone who is going to take that Jewish connection or that CIA connection or whoever he gets the drugs from, and destroy his own community with it for his own ego's sake. But, as far as a productive activity, productive endeavor, it's not, But why is it happening? Why do these bureaucracies take place? And that's the question that always permeates. Why does so much of the stuff in the world not make sense? Why is there so much bureaucracy? Why is there so much regulation? And when it comes to regulation and bureaucracy, it affects the normal person who's trying to do something. The small business owner who's trying to establish something new. It makes it so hard for that individual to get to that ultimate point of success.
Well, how do you make something make sense?
Right. Without having Jews involved. You can't do it. It's almost impossible.
But if you can't explain it, then maybe something's wrong with it. It's just that simple. If you can't sit down and explain. If you can't explain, then maybe there's something wrong.
Yeah, like, I mentioned before, the NBA, there's a guy named David Stern who was running the NBA for a very long time. All of a sudden, a guy named Adam Silver just becomes his, right-hand man. You're like, where did he come from? What does this alien-looking Jew have to do with anything? What was his process of arriving at that position where he basically can wield control over billionaire owners and millionaire athletes? And he didn't even have a process where you're like, oh, then he did this, and then he did this, and then he did this in his career, and now it makes sense for him to take over this position.
Well, in the NBA in particular, you have most of the most powerful Jews in the world.
Yeah.
I mean, you have Dan Gilbert, who's the CEO of Quicken Loans. You have Mickey Arison, who runs Carnival.
Paul Allen.
Yes, Paul Allen, definitely. And you look at who Paul Allen bought the Trailblazers from was the former president of AIPAC. Donald Sterling, for a long time, was a horrible owner, but so most of the most powerful...
The Reinsdorf family in Chicago, I think Reinsdorf was also involved in the purchase of the Sears Tower in 2004 with the Silversteins.
Mm-hmm. So you have... he's but Larry O'Brien, who was a Gentile, was also very much a puppet for the Jews. Bless you. For the Jews also, because if you remember the Celtics and Red Auerbach, he was the president for a long time. He was their coach, and one of the things about him was that Red Auerbach was the most cheatinest person in the world. He was a Jew, and he was the coach, and they won like 11 championships.
In 13 years, yeah.
In 13 years. And he would do things like would turn the opposing locker room up to where it was like 100 degrees in the visiting locker room. He would steal things.
So typically Jewish.
Right, absolutely. And he would get away with this because his best friend was the commissioner of the league. Mm-hmm. And he didn't have assistant coaches. He didn't have... scouts, and the reason being he used Vegas scouts who were if you want to know anything about sports, go to Vegas because they know everything. The odds makers are the most accurate people in the world, not sabermetrics, not any of this. So the most cheating, and he parlayed that into 11 championships. It's like he's not that much smarter than everybody else. That's the whole Jewish hubris thing. They try to make you think
they give each other awards for things, and they recognize each other, and they bring them on stage, and they have these galas and these award ceremonies, and that's what facilitates that narrative that, oh, look how accomplished we are.
I mean, how come the three-point line comes in the NBA the same year you draft Larry Bird? Were you trying? I mean, and how did he get that? Well, it's like, oh, yeah, I have this elite outside shooter that I'm going to draft with the 10th overall pick. Everybody else is passing on him because without that three-point shot, he's really in the middle of the pack as a first-rounder. But we can take him to an elite superstar status if we just put in a three-point line and then create the three-point shot.
I
and
didn't
then
know that was the year before or the year of Larry.
79, yeah.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that. Okay.
And I think that those two things are working together.
Probably, yeah. I mean,
because Red Auerbach ran the league. That's why he won so many championships.
Mm-hmm.
He had his boy there, his Trojan.
This might be breaking news. I don't know if I've ever heard this analysis done before.
Yeah, but I mean, so Larry Bird can't play defense whatsoever, and then so what do? You go out and you trade Joe Barely Cares to the Warriors, and you get Kevin McHale with the second overall pick that you took in that draft, and then Robert Parrish, who they pretty much gave away. And that's how you create the greatest front line in history of basketball.
Yeah.
But it was all manipulation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I honestly think like this latest LeBron championship, in fact, all of his championships to me are fraudulent. Mm-hmm. I mean, what happened in his first one was OKC, I believe, right? In 2011?
Yeah.
2012.
Yes. Yeah. You and I agree that he tanked the Dallas series.
Oh yeah. So yeah, let's go into that. I know this has nothing to do with politics, but yeah, he basically he was upset that Dwayne Wade had been kind of showboating throughout the year. Also had very similar numbers, if not better numbers than LeBron. Brought him to his team, and so he was basically like, I'm teaching these guys how to win because LeBron didn't have a championship. Wade definitely did, and he was proving it on the court. In the first 3 games, game 3, Wade went nuts, played very, very well. They won the game. They were up 2-1. In game 4, if you go back and look at the footage, LeBron completely checks out because what was about to happen was if they won that game, they would have been 3-1. They would have been pretty much over, and they would have won the championship. And Wade Dwayne Wade would have been Finals MVP on the team that LeBron won his first championship on. So at that point, the whole LeBron narrative, being the best player in the world, trying to be the best player in history, would have just been in complete and total shambles at that point, because he had to win his first championship on the back of Dwayne Wade, and Dwayne Wade outplayed him. Dwayne Wade in that game screams at LeBron, basically calls him out for his manhood, like, where are you at? And I think LeBron ended up with 8 points or something, either in Game 4 or Game 5. Very, very bad numbers. You could see it just from the body language and it was just total. He was destroying. He was tanking it. He was like voluntarily saying, "Hey, I'll lose this one, but I'm not winning," and letting Wade get Finals MVP. They ended up losing. It was a big thing. He made fun of everyone for having less money than him in the post-game press conference, basically like, well, you guys are going to make fun of me, but you still have to go back to your lives, and I'm a rich dude, so I get to go back to my life. Anyway, long story short, next year they play against OKC. He gets away with a huge foul on Kevin Durant at the end of Game 2. And subsequently OKC loses Game 2 and then the rest of the series as a result too. And of course the officiating is absolutely horrendous throughout. Makes no sense. And even his rise to get to these finals, it's not just so much that the officiating is bad in the finals. The officiating is bad throughout the year. It's definitely bad in the first 3 rounds. You can go back and watch the Bulls and the Cavaliers in 2011, the year that he lost against Dallas in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Derrick Rose was just murdered by these people. I mean, hacked left and right. Obviously, he had a lot less talent too, but and the narrative was facilitated. And in fact, you can go back and watch the second quarter of Game 2 of the Eastern Conference Finals in 2011, and you'll see it. I think it was 6 to 7 straight terrible calls while the Bulls were up by 8 points and basically going to take control of the series by winning Game 2, and they had already blown them out in Game 1. And it totally changed that game, and it changed the whole series. So these types of things have happened throughout his career. I mean, even if you look at what happened against Spurs. So his entire narrative isn't contrived and manufactured, yet everyone's going to tell you, oh, you're a hater for saying that, or you don't want to accept the fact that he has that much talent. And it's the same thing that the Jews do, and that's why he's basically another mini Jew, you know. And of course, you know, what's interesting is that it works out because Jay Schottenstein is his so-called idol, and Jay Schottenstein has published the Talmud, the most widely published English version of the Talmud. So you know, it just makes sense that LeBron would be so enthralled with that guy.
Yeah, Rabbi Hamite. Yeah.
So anyway, we've talked about a lot of different subjects. We're at 3 hours now, so I really appreciate you coming on, spending the time with me today.
Thank you.
We're gonna definitely try to do this more.
Absolutely.
In the future, try to look out for us online and see if you want to connect with us, ask us any other questions, anything else that you want us to address on this show, and any final words from you as well.
Oh, no, just keep your eye out for those things that we point out. Look for Soros, look for University of Chicago, look for Manhattan, look for anything with Jew, look for Mossad. Just look for it. It's there. The signs are there.
Yeah. Yeah, and when you do your research, you know, there's different things you can throw in. It's not just simply saying Jew, but look at the names, look at their origins, look at their connections, and it all usually ties back in. And there's a lot of things happening. There's a lot of chaos in the world, so it's not a perfect control. God still exists. These people don't have total control, but the worst thing that we can do is be quiet when we know something and just endorse whatever they say. You know, the thing that I've had the biggest issue with as far as people go is the whole Hillary and Trump thing, where you know we know she's evil, we know she's a murderer, we know she's corrupt, we know blah blah blah, she's a puppet of the international bankers, etc. But Donald Trump's tone is just so bad, and he just seems so crazy. I just can't deal with him, and it's very irrational, very emotional, very cowardly position to take, and I feel like everyone who does that is putting the rest of us in danger, and you know, without reason, without any just cause. And then when they do steal the election, you guys are going to facilitate that narrative that, oh, he's just a sore loser and he didn't, really win. And
it's also an attack on masculinity.
Gonna, make it happen.
It's also an attack on masculinity.
Absolutely. The antagonism towards Trump is really just about hating the alpha male for taking what he wants in life and getting things done. In fact, people say this and that about the alpha male, but the alpha male is not the person who's living off his woman or being a cowardly hypocrite, / whiny emotional person. An alpha male is a very strong person who's dedicated, who can't be taken off of his course, who can't be taken out in that traditional sense, who is answerable to no one, which is the most attractive thing to me about Trump, is that he hasn't bowed down to any of this stuff. You know, he hasn't said, oh, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that just because so-and-so wants me to. The reason why Sheldon Adelson hasn't given him the money is because he's refused to execute Sheldon Adelson's agenda and or guarantee that he would do so. Louis Eisenberg, who was involved in 9/11 and getting the trade towers to Silverstein's hands, gave him $11,000. It's a creepy Kabbalistic number, and it's totally meaningless. $11,000 is what Louis Eisenberg gave Donald Trump. So, you know, he has no support from these people, and all of you individuals who are random individuals who are going to say, oh, well, they're both the same or this and that, you really have no leg to stand on it. You need to provide evidence and proof for such an assertion.
Explain.
Because we're all going to end up dead if you don't.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That's pretty much it. This is a vote against nuclear war.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And who can stop the war? Because in the United States, we have no concept of war. We think it's a video game. This is real.
This is absolutely real.
War is real. Stop being naive. War is real. Stop worrying about, oh, his tone, oh, your feelings. Blah, blah. Get over it. What you should worry about is that war. Because bombs are coming to your country.
Yeah.
If they had a vote in Syria or vote in Palestine or Iraq or Yemen, or they're not caring about his tone.
No.
They're not. He said mean things. No, get over it.
Absolutely.
How can you win a war when you're worried about your feelings and you want to go to war? You can't go to war like that.
Yeah, you're not prepared. No, you're not prepared.
You think you're going to win a war? You're not going to, you're going to go down and cry and then the Russian soldier's supposed to feel sorry for you?
Yeah, or if your country attacks Russia, what do you expect? They're not going to blow up your city and you might be collateral damage. Yeah. And the Clintons don't care about you at all.
The thing about it is, I don't think Putin will ever drop one nuke in the United States. In fact, I think Putin will solve America's problem by nuking Israel eventually.
Maybe.
Or he might even be a nuke, because I think he would destroy the area. I think he's actually just going to go, or even arm Hezbollah and Hamas, and just
Hezbollah's waiting. That's why people thought right after 2006 that after Hezbollah liberated South Lebanon that Israel was going to attack again to prove their superiority and be like, oh no, we lost this time, but watch what we're going to do. But they haven't, and the reason they haven't is because Hezbollah already has.
I think all you need to do to wipe Israel off the map is have Putin give Hezbollah all the weaponry they can
and
have.
Training. Yep, and they're already a great paramilitary force. They probably the best guerrilla fighting force in history, I would say, based on the weapons and based on the terrain and based on everything else. And the Houthis, honestly, the Houthis are giving them a run for their money. The Houthis in Yemen have been absolutely phenomenal. They've really elevated the spirits. I know that a lot of people have been destroyed, and what was already a starving country, it was already a very impoverished place. It's gotten much worse because of what the Saudis have done. And this is, of course, an Israeli strategic objective, because there was weapons that were getting to the Palestinian resistance through Yemen and through Bab al-Mandab. And they didn't want that. And now we have that war in Yemen, and they have really made the resistance axis, which I and you and other people are a part of globally in terms of the intellectual and the rational and telling people what the truth is about these things. They have really made us look good and made us proud for what they've done. And they've arguably done even better than Hezbollah with when it comes to Israel against the Saudis. And it's just been brilliant and beautiful to watch. And
see, that's the brilliant point is, even from a selfish point, if I'm Putin, I'm like, I don't have to have Russians' lives die. I got these. All I have to do is arm these guys and let these guys take care of my enemies.
Right.
And then I can stay back in case I have a war with Europe, and I can keep all my guys here.
Absolutely. And that's why it's really just mutually assured destruction, which is what they have traditionally stated was the reason why we would never have nuclear wars, because it didn't help anyone, and it doesn't help anyone except Israel and the Jews. And that's why we have to outline that they are the source of all of this anger and animosity and vitriol and
manifestation hatred. Of Deuteronomy 20. Your belief, your scriptures are the DNA of your belief system, and this is what Jewish belief is. And even the God narrative within the chosenness and God and all that is just the snake oil that they sell. And when you're a snake oil salesman, you don't have to believe the snake oil cures anything. All you have to do is sell the bottle of snake oil.
That's right.
And they're selling their chosenness of God, and that's what they're doing. They don't have to believe in it, but that's what unites them, and then that is what makes them higher above everyone else. And like you said before, they find ways that they can get over God and become better than God, and it's all snake oil, and they don't have to believe it. And
well, they've already done it in Europe. The biggest thing is that you can't criticize Jews in Europe at all. Canada
can't question the Holocaust. You
can't question the Holocaust. Can't even say anything against them. In fact, in France, for example, it's very obvious. You can say anything you want against the Muslims to provoke them on purpose, but you cannot say anything against the Jew, even as a comedian, even as a joke. You can't do it. So Dieudonné has suffered for that, and that's basically elevating you above God, because at the end of the day, you can say whatever you want about God. You can go into the streets, and Femin, for example, it talks about God this and God that and religion this and that. And they're allowed to do that, no problem. In fact, it's encouraged. But at the same time, the Jew has been elevated above God in the sense that they are above reproach. They are above being criticized. And
the Jewish God is the Jewish people.
Yeah,
yeah.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hopefully everyone enjoys that. Get us any questions. You can message us, and hopefully subscribe, hit like, comment, whatever you have to do, and try to spread this out as far and as wide as possible. And for those who are prayer minded, do pray for the rest of our species, for our planet, for being safeguarded in this very tumultuous age that at any moment half of humanity could be wiped off the face of the earth. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.